Um,
Okay, so who's leading this? Are you? Is yeah,
it
this is an
it doesn't
SNS
matter.
follow-up.
Yeah, it
Okay,
does.
well
It's
you go ahead because this is an SNS follow-up. So you do the intro.
okay.
Okay,
Hello,
one.
hello, 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 and welcome to another exciting episode of Skeptics and Seekers Sunday Sermon Supplemental 5S, and also a an episode of Real Seekers because we're both going to be using this recording. How you doing, Dale?
I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, no one. It's nobody's show really. Uh, it would just be weird if we both did our introductions all at the same time,
That's
because that's just
exactly
crazy.
yeah.
So, this is a
Well, I
show.
have heard some podcasts that do that. So
Yeah, so there's no leader, there's no moderator. This is just us. We did a session yesterday. We call it a practice session, I suppose. It was most illuminating. You will never see what happened on that show, but there might be a summary here in a moment. Dale will be the chief summarizer in chief. Um, and this show, we thought that it would be useful to just hit record on so that you could both see how we do this when we're tackling a real proposition. And so before we jump into this one, even though I've got some stuff on screen here, Dale is going to also have some stuff on screen. I actually don't know how this works when two people have stuff on screen. But
well, you have to stop sharing. It's only one person at a time.
it's one
Uh,
person at a time. We can't do multiple screen shares. Are you
no.
sure?
Like you can, but I don't know how it works when you set it up for multiple participants can share simultaneously.
Okay, just try sharing your screen at some point when you're doing this introduction. And if it knocks me off, great. Or if it doesn't share yours, great. But at least we'll know because I think you can do.
Okay, well,
I think you can do it both.
if you could just stop sharing for a second, then I guess I'll share my thing.
Do you have a share button available right there?
I do, but if you
Just
could,
just hit
this
it.
will stop other screen sharing. Do you want to
Yeah,
continue?
just go ahead and do that.
O- Okay,
Yeah, it's okay.
perfect. Okay, cool. So, I don't want you guys seeing my email, but anyways, there it is. Cool. So yeah, so yesterday, me and David did a practice run, just kind of going over the math and explaining how it works and everything like that. But the first thing I did, because there's a lot of misunderstanding, whether it's from the Christian, like Mac Attack on the show, or Andrew and stuff, there's this confusion about what I'm talking about with subjective probabilities and versus objective evidence. And I keep saying, look, every single one of you guys are doing the exact same thing that I'm doing. I'm just better. I'm just more explicit because I'm actually assigning numerical values to the reasoning, the objective reasoning, and my subjective assessment of those objective reasons. So the first thing I did with David was just kind of try to establish that we are in fact doing the same thing. And I want to run through the exercise and stuff, right? So okay, so David, I can stop sharing, I guess, for now. But David, um, in philosophy, there are three different types of doxastic attitudes. Doxastic referring to beliefs and stuff like that, right? So you can either believe a given proposition or hypothesis is true. You can disbelieve that it's true, so you think it's false, or you're agnostic. You can suspend judgment. I don't know. Maybe this proposition is true. Maybe it's false. These are the three main categories of what philosophers call a doxastic attitude. Um, would you agree that you believe things, you disbelieve things, and maybe there are some times when you just suspend your judgment, you don't know?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So we all agree on that front. Now, the second component is what philosophers call a level of credence. So, taking the fancy words out, David, are there things that you believe with varying degrees of strength? So, for example, are there things that you are absolutely believe absolutely are true? You have zero doubts at all. You know it's true absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. Are there propositions that you believe, but you have some minor doubts about? You're not absolutely certain about it.
Yes.
Okay. And are there propositions that you believe, but you have some major doubts about? You got a lot more less certainty about it.
Yes, but we get into a complicated territory because if I have major doubts about it, I probably wouldn't say I believe it.
Well, it's are there examples where you're like, yeah, all things considered, yeah, I do believe this is true, but it's a very weakly held belief because of the
I would, sure. I think I understand where you're going. I'll go ahead and say yes. I just wanted to clarify that. There are things that I believe weakly.
cool. Okay, same questions, but on the opposite end. Are there things that you disbelieve that are with absolute certainty, no doubts at all or anything like that?
Absolutely.
Cool. And I take it you would also agree there are varying degrees of disbelief that you have, right? Maybe you disbelieve something and you have some minor doubts, or you
All
disbelieve.
all the same categories. Yes.
Awesome. All right, cool. So that is what that varying degrees of belief and or on the other end disbelief are what philosophers call your level of credence. There are degrees of belief and stuff like that. And that is what that level of credence, that subject, what David would call the subjective, that subjective only in the sense that, look, only you have private access to your level of credence. I can't access that unless you reveal it to me or tell me through some objective means, right? So that's the difference between objective and subjective. Is just objective is it's directly accessible to other people outside of you. But in terms of your level of credences, I'm not a mind reader. I can't look into your mind and assess, oh, yeah, David believes this, but he has major doubts. Or, you know what, David believes this, but he has some minor doubts. I can't get that unless you reveal that to me and tell me. So that's what I mean. The levels of credences are subjective. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Cool. And that's the same for everything, right? The levels of credence for scientists deciding on a scientific hypothesis in the absence of statistical probabilities or something like that, that's subjective too.
Uh, I don't know that I want to speak about the realm of how scientists think. I'm not a scientist. I've read lots of science books from physicists and so forth, and I don't know that there is a one-to-one correlation between how a scientist thinks and how a non-scientist thinks about these things.
Okay, I'll just tell you then it is. It's exactly the same. When they lack statistical things, if they say something that can't be proven absolutely or something, and they're just giving their level of credence, it is the same. It's the exact same process, right? They're just reporting on their subjective level of confidence. But the
They,
point
they,
that I want
they
to
tend to talk about things that they know and can prove, and they might talk about a theory as to what a logical conclusion for those things that they're studying. These are the evidences of the things that I think. For instance, string theory. You can listen to Brian Greene on string theory. He's very very big, and we know that string theory is an unproven theory, but within that, he gives you lots of actual, tangible, real things to study, and then you can determine how likely it is for string theory to be true. He doesn't, he.
that
But
well
I don't
that's
know that he would say, yeah, I believe it's 87%
no, we're
proven.
not talking about percents yet, right?
All right.
I have literally heard scientists say, without any statistical calculations or any they'll provide their reasons in words and stuff like that, but they'll literally say, I think this is more probable, or I believe this. Yes, there are some things against it or some doubts about it. We can't prove it absolutely certain, but they'll say what you said. For example, they might say, yes, I believe this very strongly. I have some doubts, of course, but Yeah, they'll say some stuff of that nature.
Well, sure, but then their scientific papers and documents, and even popular books, are full of things that can be statistically and scientifically cataloged. And so
Irrelevant.
that's
That's the question of the evidence and stuff. They're still, in terms of them giving their subjective level of credence in words, they're doing the exact same thing you did, right? Like what you're
eh,
saying is it's a question of evidence, right? Like, oh well, hey, they evaluated it.
right. I'm more thinking about their public communications and exactly how they communicate it. And I'm not comfortable with saying that when they communicate these things, they're doing it exactly the way you're describing, or exactly the way I might communicate something that I think but can't prove. Scientific communication is usually fairly precise, and so that said, I take the point that you're trying to give, but I would just leave it to the audience that
Just watch the William Lane Craig versus Sean Carroll. Sean Carroll does exactly what David said. Okay, so I'm not talking about peer reviewed stuff. Like, yeah, they're not saying in conclusion I believe this, but with doubts. That's not the
mm,
point. But the point is they are saying, yeah, based on the evidences presented in this paper, you ought to believe this. It's more probable. Or yeah, there are problems with this model, but I believe it is perfectly mathematically consistent and therefore plausible. And I think it's more likely than some other model. They favor their models over other models. So they do make these subjective level of credence things. And the point that I was trying to get is that every single one of us, every one of us, in the do make these subjective credence assessments, and that is what corresponds to my subjective probabilities. That's what I'm calling subjective probabilities. I'm just this qualia of my credence. I'm just translating that into a number. I'm quantifying my qualia and saying, "Hey, I'm 87%." That you say you believe it very strongly, but you have some doubts. Okay, well, what is the precise number? I'm 87%. And sometimes there's some fuzziness because the evidence, it isn't always able to get a precise reading about your level of credence. So I assign ranges, right? So I'm about 65 to 80% certain in this case. That's my qualia of credence given this set of objective evidence that I'm considering and stuff like that. I would say about 60 to 85%. So you can also give ranges because as human beings, there are sometimes fuzziness and vagueness where we can't be, oh no, it's 87.23 in every single case. Um, so yeah, so David, you understand that point is, look, when I'm talking about my individual subjective probabilities, I'm saying we have a set of objective evidence that everyone can look at, read, and assess and take in. But then there's this subjective component that everyone does, whether you're a scientist, historian, logician, a layman, whatever, where you assess this and come up with a level of credence. You
so
make
let me say I agree that it is a human thing. All humans have subjective levels of credence, and in different forms of our communication, we express that subjective level of credence. I'm not arguing against that. So I agree with that. That's not where our disagreement is.
Yeah, exactly. And we haven't gotten to where you disagree, but in for the audience sake, so you understand then that when I'm assigning my subjective number probability values, I'm just translating what we all have, that subjective credence level, and just putting a number on it,
Yes.
a helpful heuristic to
Yes.
say this is how strong I am. Okay, great. And that's what I mean by we all do it. But now, David, if we had multiple components, as we're going to see in the example today, right? So let's say we don't just have one evidence, but we have multiple lines of evidence speaking for or against whether we should believe something or not. yeah, let me just ask, like, how would you put all of those pieces together? To go, well, overall, my credence level, I believe this, or overall, no, I disbelieve this. There's just too many things against it. Isn't that a also a subjective overall credence thing?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, if I understood the question, yeah, fully agree.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and just to clarify, making sure you understand. So you have a bunch of you have five independent evidences. You've assigned your individual subjective credence levels, and then you've got to say, well, how do I put all the pieces together and say overall, do I believe this? Do I disbelieve this with doubts? Do I suspend judgment? Ultimately you're making an overall credence assessment, and that is also subjective, in the same way the individual ones are. So that's all I was saying there. So here's another key difference, and why this is when I'm asking what's the overall credence level. My method, this is where I bring in Bayes' theorem, and I just plug in those individual subjective credence levels quantified, as David likes to call it, quantified qualia, the qualia of my level of credence for each individual aspect. And Bayes is an objective way. So I'm superior. I don't just have a subjective overall credence level. I actually have an objective overall credence level given the input, the individual inputs, and I get my overall thing with my Bayesish method. I find out, well, if these numbers are proper, this is objectively where you would be overall. You should believe it, you shouldn't, you should disbelieve, or you should suspend judgment, depending on where it comes out. Um, is that part clear as to where there's a difference in our methodologies? So on the overall,
Right, but am I going to get a chance to spell out the differences? I understand it.
yep. One thing I just want to say before you do, because I
Okay.
forgot to say it before and I should have, is okay. So in philosophy, so when I'm bringing in these numbers, right? In philosophy, when you believe, say you believe something, that is with numbers. That's okay. It's over 50%. It's the proposition is more probable than not. So that means anything more than 50%, any all the way up to 100%, means you believe. And again, there's a spectrum there. So those are the different credences. I may have a 60% level of credence versus 85. Same with the disbelief. There's a spectrum there. So anything that's less than 50%, all the way down to 0%, means you disbelieve with varying levels of subjective credences. Obviously, 50% is the only one I would argue where you should, technically speaking, on suspend judgment and that sort of thing, just on a straightforward evidentialist account. So that was the last thing I just wanted to say. But yeah, over to you, David, if you want to spell out some differences.
Yeah. So I'm not trying to debate the issue as we did yesterday. I'm just trying to spell out the differences in our positions, and people might be confused about the differences in our positions because I seem to have agreed with everything. But what I've agreed with is that I understand how you come up or why you come up with your numbers and why you think they're superior. But you were having trouble understanding the pushback of why people don't seem to accept that. Uh, and so it is not that we don't have subjective um, what is credences. It's not that we don't. It's not that we don't have subjective credences. That is extremely human. Of course we do. We very much have subjective credences, and we convey those subjective credences with words. So the example that I used yesterday, because I've been an app reviewer and product reviewer, and if you're writing for someone else, you're using their star system or whatever their number system is for reviews. You might have like a 5-star system. Is this a 4-star, 4.5 star? Do they allow half stars? What do these numbers mean? Because if they just exactly uh, uh, relate it to the numbers, then a 4-star review would be 80%. And a 4.5-star review would be 90%. If you see where that's going. I mean, if we just wanted to put numbers there, but the star system is a kind of a repudiation of the number system because it's fuzzier than that, and they don't want to put exact numbers, and so the stars kind of represent ranges. But if you say that 1 star is 0 to 20%, 2 stars is 20 to 40%, 3 stars is 40 to 60%, 5 stars is I lost track, 5 stars 80 to 100%. If you say that, then you're just reintroducing the numbers that you were trying to get rid of in the first place. We didn't want to do numbers. You can do numbers. You can say 85.2%. Reviewers don't want to do that. Publications largely don't want to do that. There's some that do. But when they implement a star system, they're doing it precisely because they don't want a one-to-one um, system of uh, reducing their opinions to numbers. They are doing exactly the opposite. They want you to not think of a numerical value. They want it to be fuzzy. It's not a specific range. And to understand the star system, there is usually a chart, or a write-up, a brief paragraph, or an article that they point to. And that article explains what their system means. Even the ones that use numbers explain what those numbers mean and why you can't really trust the numbers as precise guides. Even the numbers are heuristics. They're not precise. And so companies that do this professionally want to give you a complicated opinion about a thing. And what they do to convey their opinion is they write 3,000 words or so about that thing. If it's a major product, a new iPhone, something like that, they write a major write-up with lots of details and lots of opinions on the way. And they want you to figure out whether, based on all of that information, you think it's a good buy or not. They do not want to tell you this new iPhone or this new Galaxy phone is a 93. Once again, they will do that and you'll see some of those numbers, but there's usually a document or something disclaiming, this is precise. They want to try to disintermediate the opinion from a specific number. And so this is kind of where Dale and I disagree, because as humans, yes, we have subjective uh, credences, and we want to communicate. Let me just finish this paragraph. We want to communicate the subjective credences, but we are purposely communicating it in a way that avoids attaching a specific number to it. And so when Dell says, yeah, well, I take my subjective credence one step further and I put a number to it. And so that's better. And we're saying, no, it's not better. We want you to take our subjective credences just as we explained it to you and not try to quantify our qualia of belief beyond that, because even we don't.
Gotcha. And I wasn't interrupting. I was saying very good. You guys got the word credences, but yeah. So, and obviously, I want to affirm. Yeah, thank you, David. I think you spelled it out. Where obviously David and I would disagree, but I think that assigning the numbers as a helpful heuristic tool, because I'm not trying to get you to believe 93% necessarily. I'm just arguing, hey, this is my level of credence, and here's why. I mean, I give a lot more than 3,000 words. I give like 200 pages as to why. So that's all the same. That's all there, in both cases. But yeah, I give a specific. Sometimes you can't give a specific, right? So sometimes I follow the star method, and the way I did that in my method, if I had a range, like say I'm 70 to 80% convinced on a given line of reasoning or evidence, I would put that range. And for the sake of Bayes, because you do need a specific number for Bayes, I would always assume the worst case scenario for the hypothesis I was going for, or in other words, against Christianity. I kind of cheated, right? So if it was a negative evidence, I would usually go with the highest number that hurts the case for Christianity or that God exists. If it was a positive evidence that helped it, I would go just take the lowest number and plug that into Bayes. That was just a tool that I did to mitigate against my bias and stuff like that. But yeah, so I think everything is the same. You can have the ranges, but David, I do take your point that you think, I think erroneously, I disagree with this, but you think there's something lost in the translation when you assign a number, even if it's a range of numbers, as opposed to just keeping it in writing. And
Yes.
I'll admit this, Mike Lacona agrees with you fully. This is, and a lot of historians do. This is why they refuse to assign even number ranges. They'll have a scale, for example. Oh, well, something is either they don't say call it agnostic, but it's you don't know. It's more probable than not. It's very probable. It's extremely probable, and it's absolutely certain. And then they have the same with the disbelief. They prefer to keep it loosey goosey with, from my perspective, with these words rather than going, well, what is very probable? What does that mean? I would say it's 60 to 80% or 65 to 80%, whatever you want to put that range at, whatever you think the range is when you're conveying very probable or something, right? I don't know what Mike Lacona means by that, but um, yeah, I just think that's more helpful if you assign the numbers. It's another heuristic tool that helps the other person in conversation understand, in addition to your written reasons and written communication, they can also get some insight into you with these numbers. And it helps avoid bias in terms of the cumulative credence. That's purely subjective on David's. If you just have words, your overall credence, considering all the lines of evidence, that's going to be subjective too. I don't have that problem. My overall credence, again, contingent on the individual subjective stuff, the garbage in, garbage out thing, but taking that out, in terms of understanding how to put all those pieces together, that's totally objective. And I think that's a superior way. That's a more helpful way. It helps mitigate against biases.
And I would
But
just say,
it's not a debate for on that. But
no.
just be just understand. Yeah, me and David understand each other, what we're doing perfectly, and yeah, we disagree on the usefulness of using numbers. But yeah, I'll let you have the last word on this. So
Yeah, I would just say that, I understand what you're doing and I understand why you think it's superior. I don't think it's superior because putting an objective set of operators on fake numbers still gives you a fake result. And so you can't trust the result, not because you did the operators incorrectly, but because everything that you inputted into the equation was subjective. And if it's something that's really close, if it's something that's not really close, doing the math isn't going to make a difference anyway, because it's just going to show you what you already know. Yes, you believe this, or no, you don't believe this. But if it's something that's really close and you come up with a bunch of subjective numbers and they have, pretty broad ranges, getting a number that's 51% or 53% or even 6% is not an indication that you should believe it, because you already know that you don't believe it, but it's a close call, and you're still studying it, and so at the end of the day, you shouldn't make a decision based on the precision of the operators that you put on subjective numbers.
okay. So this is what I mean. This was the objection that McAtack and others were giving that just doesn't make any sense. So take out the probability aspect, the subjective credences, because that's just a translation thing, right? If you just have written reasons, you've admitted that's a subjective level of credence that you're assigning to that. So what you're saying is that everyone who doesn't have a statistical basis is just having garbage in. That's not true. You are rational in believing evolution. Yesterday we did the proposition that the Democrats did not cheat sufficiently to win the election. And you had a very strong level of credence, taking the probability out of it.
See, I
Uh,
wasn't even going to talk about that
no, no, but
because I knew
are
that
you?
there are
But if
people
Dave,
that their pants just caught on fire with you saying that.
no,
That's
no,
going to
we
be the only
don't
thing
need
they
to get into the
remember.
details. But I just want to say we did that. Now,
Yeah.
David, if I came to you and said, yeah, but you're all those lines of evidence you gave for that hypothesis, it's just at the end of the day a subjective level of credence. You shouldn't believe this. It's all meaningless. All the lines of evidence, it doesn't prove anything because you're just making a subjective credence level on that basis. So no, I disbelieve. I think they did cheat on the basis of that evidence. No, you think you're rational, and you're correct. You are rational, even though you're using subjective credences. So it's exactly the same. Subjective credences are not GIGO, not necessarily, right? You have That's my point that I wanted to go against Mac and Andrew and everyone else. That's
No,
that's the point
it's
I want to
not garbage, but it's also subjective, and that's why you know trying to add precision to something that is inherently imprecise is will leave you with something inherently imprecise. So by doing the operator, you come up with a false security of your precision that you can't have. And my personally, and I don't know that this applies to other people who object to your particular method. I believe that Bayes is the wrong tool to do the thing that you want to do because Bayes wants precise numbers to live its best life. And with this type of thing that you're doing, whether it's you or Richard Carrier or Swinburne or Pascal, it doesn't matter. Um, what you're doing is giving the math not actual precise numbers, and yet you're leaning heavily on the result. And so I would just say that if you do this operation and you end up with a number, you should feel as fuzzy about your end number as you do about any of the inputs that you had when you started.
again, we are turning into a debate, but yeah, like I just
Yeah.
fundamentally disagree. No, I
Yeah.
when I have a
But the
range,
thing is,
I'm
we do
absolutely
understand. I do understand your position. I just want the audience to know. I understand your position. I know that you understand my position. We're just relitigating
yeah.
a
Okay.
thing.
Just for the audience. So what I hear, David, is again, it's not about the numbers, but I'm going to use that as a tool here to illustrate, right? Like I am at when we have our own range. Sometimes the evidence is of a vague nature where we do need a range. I do confess that, and there were certain factors where I was okay. I'm 75 to 80%, or even wider, or maybe I'm like 65 to 85% or something like that, and I handled that. But in terms of that range, I'm absolutely certain that is my subjective level. It is, if you assign 64%, that's incorrect. That is garbage in. It has to be minimally 65%. And I would always go again with the number that is hurting, the hypothesis that I want to be true or something like that, just as a practical way. But
Yeah, but
it's
I
not.
see. I actually
David
disagree
is
with
kind
that
of saying,
too.
well, see, you're missing something. It's actually 64.5. Um, and because you're just giving a subjective thing, you've got the range wrong or something like that. I would say no, that's impossible. When I do have a range, or I have a precise, even when I have a precise number, that is my number. Remember, it's subjective. I alone have private access to it. And that is an incorrigible belief. I cannot be wrong any more than I can be wrong that I'm feeling happy. No, you could dispute that and stuff like that, but only I have private access, and it's an incorrigible
I agree. I
belief.
agree with that. That's not debatable. But what I was saying when I was rudely interrupting, and you rudely stopped me from interrupting, was
But having a
uh, how dare you? What was that the range thing? You said this a couple of times, and I kind of cringe a little bit when I hear that because sometimes the range might be 25%, let's say, or 30%, a 30% range. anywhere from 50% to 80%, because I'm just not sure. This is a very broad range, or anywhere between 50% and 100%, because I really don't know. But I'm kind of leaning toward it being true. So if you just take those ranges, which are themselves subjective, and you say, I'm going to choose the lowest number here because of whatever, and for this thing, I'm going to choose the highest one, you're you're still blowing the precision of the math, because you are choosing numbers that are not necessarily accurately describing what you're feeling. I would think that if you're gonna have a range of things and you're gonna try to boil it down to numbers, then you should aim for the center of that range and use that number as opposed to the high number or the low number. So just in that matter of methodology, I don't think you're coming up with a good result because you're choosing the wrong number in the range.
Fair enough. I would tend to say that again, anything within the range is true to life, but I would just always tend, as a consistent approach, I would always tend to take the lowest number as the worst case scenario because that is the lowest number that you're guaranteed and stuff like that. But okay, that's a question of methodology. Like I said, I cheated by taking the highest number when it counted against my thing. That was just a practical thing. I don't think you should do that. I think you should take the lowest level if you want a worst case scenario type
But
thing,
but
right?
we're not trying to get a worst case scenario. We're trying to get precision, as close to precision as we can. Precision is not the
Okay.
worst case scenario.
It's average. Okay, cool. That's fine with me. Like I said, that's fine. But the point that I'm making is that's allowed, whether it's words or numbers, you have the same issue that you're raising. It doesn't matter, but yet we still think people we're rational and stuff. Because I'm sorry, there's loss of translation in conveying yourself in words
I
too. Trust
agree.
me.
There's definitely loss of translation there, but that loss of translation is the gain. It is that we are doing a human thing with other humans, and we have fuzziness and imprecision. And to make it more precise is to lose the human fuzziness that is built into our communication. I use the words as descriptions and not the numbers, precisely to convey the fuzziness. And I don't want someone
Okay.
coming along and fixing it by trying to make it more precise than I want it to be.
Gotcha. Okay, as promised, I will give you the last word on that debate. And like I said, there are people on both sides to this issue, even at the academic level. So you know what side I'm on. You know what side David's on. All right, so
And that
let's
said, I'm going to do the numbers today anyway. So, so
exactly.
this is.
I'm like, have you forgotten why we're here, David? But all right, cool. So basically, I told the audience what we did yesterday, but for today, David came up with his own hypothesis, essentially trying to prove that the God of the Bible. So obviously, David's an atheist. It's not about whether God is real, but it's the God as described in the Bible is not an omni God. He's not omniscient. He's not omnipotent or something like that. So David, with that, you get to lead this part of the discussion because you've done. What did you do? You tell the audience.
I'm going to share my screen. So let me hit that button and switch to my thing right here. Okay. Is that showing up for everyone? I don't hear you, everyone. Okay, I'm going to assume that that's showing up. Um, so the God of the Bible is not omni. This is actually
Yes, it is. Sorry, I was frozen there for a second. But
no,
yeah,
no,
we can
that's
see it.
okay. I hit you with my freeze ray. Um, the folks, you too can get a freeze ray for $19.99. Skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com. The God of the Bible is not omni. I've been working on this. Working is a strong word. I've been kind of mulling through this proposition for a few years, because I've heard a lot about this God of the philosophers, and the omni aspects of God and what he has to be. With William Lane Craig's version of the cosmological argument. He does the first part, and then there's a second part where he goes into attributes of God that I think no one could possibly know or intuit from philosophy. And I began to ask the question, does it even make sense that the God of the Bible is an omni God, as Christians say he is? And is that theologically sound? And the more I thought about it and looked into it in my spare time, the more I became convinced that, uh, well, for the first level of um, credence I had was, I'm not sure. It's not a slam dunk. It doesn't seem like he is necessarily, but maybe there's some things in here that can be interpreted that way. And the more I studied it, the more I went to disbelieving the proposition that the God of the Bible is an omni-God. So I'm willing to say the God of the Bible is not an omni-God. But to what degree of credence? Um, let's find out, shall we? Um, so shall we go through?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, do you want me to let you go through everything and then come
No,
back, or
let's
should I?
do background knowledge. And you know, we were having some issues with background knowledge the other day, and so before I give my background evidences, which is on the screen so people can just read them, um, go ahead and make whatever corrections you wanted to make about what you had said about background knowledge, and then we'll go through and see if any of these and which ones qualify for background knowledge. And if there's some that don't qualify for background knowledge, I will either move it to the evidence category or strike it.
Mhm. Okay. All right, cool. So yeah, so the other day there was some confusion as to what is the distinction. Like basically, background knowledge or evidence is anything that shows the hypothesis is true or false based on the intrinsic considerations, right? A priori, before you consider external evidence for or against it. Obviously, the evidence, the evidential component, what I was calling the direct evidence is, obviously, yeah, you've got specific evidence that directly verifies or falsifies a given hypothesis. So, um, yeah, like I already see a problem with the first one. If you want to describe, how do you want to do this? The
We'll just go through them one by one here. In fact, I don't even need to talk about the numbers at the right now. The the laws of logic require that an omnigod must maintain its status as omnigod. So the laws of logic, a does not equal not a. It's kind of a law of identity. A is a, and a is not a. A cannot be not a. Uh, and so if we apply that here, the laws of logic require that an omnigod must maintain its status as an omnigod. A must equal a. Omnigod equals an omnigod, and cannot equal less than an omnigod. So that's pretty clear, even if it's not terribly clear the way I've written it.
Oh, I
So
totally get it.
yeah, so an omni-God has to be an omni-God, and you can't say that he's God, an omni-God, if he's less than an omni-God. So Jesus, and so the rest of this is just spooling out that a little bit more as a specific. I probably didn't even need to put it here at all, but Jesus equals limited human, therefore less than omni-God. Jesus is God, therefore God is not omni.
Gotcha. Cool. So, and just for the sake of the audience, obviously, as a Christian, I could debate David's thing and say, well, this isn't a fact. Jesus was never less than an omni-God, but that doesn't matter for David's sake here. I'm assuming the facts as he's giving it, right? So, let's assume that it's true that the Bible describes Jesus as not as less than an omni-God. Now, this is a good argument, I think, but I would include this as direct evidence, not background knowledge. Why? Because look, you're including external evidence in your consideration. You have to go to Bible verses that say that, well, guess what? As a matter of fact, there's evidence that Jesus was less
So let me
than an
stop you right
omni.
there. That's why I said I probably didn't need to include that part. But the very first part, the laws of logic require, um, we could stop there because the background knowledge is the laws of logic. And I'm just explaining how the laws of logic would apply to this.
Yeah, so the law of identity,
Yes.
or of indiscernibles and stuff. I would agree that would be background evidence, but the only thing with it is that would do nothing to, you would still be at 50-50% because it's a tautology. Yes, the laws of logic require A to be A, or an omnigod to maintain its omnigod status. Otherwise, it's no longer omni. So I agree with that. That's a relevant consideration, but there's no argument that will either raise or lower the truth or falsity of the hypothesis, because there's nothing here that would say, and guess what? He wasn't always omni. Maybe he was. If you take out the part about Jesus, it just tells us nothing. So we remain at 50-50 given this background knowledge, even though I do admit that, yeah, that could be relevant. The laws of logic could be used and they are part of our background evidence. But you haven't used them. Taking out the Jesus part, you haven't used them to say anything about the truth or falsity. So we're still at 50-50 then.
So I have it at 57, and let me just explain why I have that number, because there are people listening to this who would say, "Yeah, but you've got a slam dunk argument. It should be in the 90s." And the reason it's only 57, which is close to Dale's 50, is because I also recognize that the authors of the biblical literature were not considering the laws of logic. Heck, I doubt they knew them. So when they're describing God, and when they're talking about Jesus, and when Jesus becomes God, or however that works, they are not considering uh, a logical inconsistency. They're just
Gotcha.
writing stories. And so they could still think of God as an omni God and have a contradiction. But my proposition is about whether he is an omni God in the literature. And I'm also taking into consideration the author's original intent. And because we don't know the author's original intent and mindset here, like I said, they may have written an inconsistency, which I believe they most certainly have, but they also were probably not thinking about laws of logic at the time. And so this would not necessarily count against them thinking that God was an omni God, even though it absolutely does count against it.
Gotcha. Perfect. Yeah, and just again to be clear for any Christians, it's not my role to dispute the evidence here, because we're just doing this for illustration as to where David is. So I'm taking everything he's saying about Jesus here true. So the only thing, David, so that's great. Your reasoning makes perfect sense, but let's include this 57%, but we'll just include it as direct evidence against the, or in favor of the hypothesis in this case.
Okay, I
Um,
was I was really hoping that I could really work the laws of logic into a proper piece of background evidence, but I will background knowledge. But I will just put this in E equals because it's not background at all.
Well, if you want the laws of logic, here's, I don't know if you have it in your other things, but you could say, well, look, the laws of logic require require something to be coherent and not contradictory. An omni God by definition is contradictory. And then that would be a
But I would have to
background.
say it's contradictory to the facts as presented in the text. And the moment I introduce the text, you would say it's no longer background evidence. So I don't think there is a way that I could introduce it as something that you would qualify as background evidence and not
I
also
don't I don't think you even need the text, right? Because you're saying that an omni God, this is the concept
just
you're.
an omni-God has to remain an omni-God. That's it. His
Oh, yeah.
identity must always be his identity. That's the background knowledge um, that I'm using. OG equals OG.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I forgot. Your hypothesis is that the biblical description of God is not. Okay, okay, cool. So yeah, we do have to treat this as evidence though.
Okay.
So okay, so let's move to your next one.
All right. So nothing we can verify that exists has all of any attribute. Does that qualify as background knowledge?
I do think it qualifies as background knowledge. Does it nothing we can verify that exists has all of any attribute. So how does that translate to then
So if
that
God
that we can't?
exists, if we could verify God, he also wouldn't have all of any attribute either. But the fact is, we're just we're just kind of hypothesizing that there is something that we can't verify that has all of some attribute. And
Does
that would simply go against everything that is known right now. I'm not saying that it's impossible. That's why I only put this at 68% because of the objection that yeah, but that just accounts for all that we can verify. You can't verify God, at least in the same way that you can verify all things, all other things that exist. So there's a possibility that there could be something we can't verify that has all of some attribute. So does it prove that God is not an omni-God? No, but I think that it is a strong piece of background knowledge to take into the equation.
okay. Yeah, I think this could work. Like obviously you need just a little bit more, like maybe you would need something that from the Bible that speaks that I don't know, only the only things that exist are things we can verify or something, something in the Bible that says that. And also um
See, I was trying to leave the Bible out of my background knowledge, um, but
but
which is
the problem is your hypothesis is about the Bible,
yes,
you know, the biblical description of God.
yeah. But you just
Um,
dinged me for including a theological element from the Bible in my other one, and I knew that that might be subject to getting dinged, but I put it there anyway.
well, the difference there, as I see it, the reason why I dinged you for the first one is because like the part of the Bible you're using is like directly relevant to the truth or falsity of the hypothesis. Like you're
I
saying,
All of the Bible though is relevant to the truth or falsity of the
well, I mean, if you
hypothesis.
quoted here a verse that just is speaking generally that yeah, only things that we can verify exist, and then you're saying, well, look, nothing we can verify that exists. I don't know. Okay, yeah, I'll allow this one because there needs to be some work. I don't know. I don't know myself. Like I'm trying to think of how I would word it to make it background evidence given your specific hypothesis. I can't think of it on the spot. So let's just
Yeah. And
include this
for
as
that
background.
matter, I don't even know how I would validate the statement. I think it's true, but someone clever might come up with something that we can verify that is all of some
Well,
quality. And I just, it is my failure of imagination to even imagine that with things that we can verify.
what about this? Do you think that things that are unverified are implausible, and that the Bible specifically speaks against implausible things in some way? Do you think you can
No,
make that case?
mm-mm. I guess the Bible doesn't speak against implausible things. It speaks very much in favor of implausible things and things that are singular in nature. And so, you know, this thing that I've given 68% credence, oh, there's another 32% out there that says, yeah, but the authors, uh, the 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 biographers of God, if you will, would agree with me and still say, but God is not like anything that can be verified. And so it's not evidence, but it's background knowledge that would help us evaluate the evidence.
Okay. So in that case, I think that this could count as background evidence, but you what it should be is again 50-50 because it says nothing. It why does that falsify that the biblical God is an omni God? It just doesn't then.
Well, because claims of singular beings and singular events and so forth much harder to believe and much less likely than things that repeat and can be verified. So it's not 50%. It's not impossible that there are singular events and things that can't be verified having, you know, qualities
Okay.
that we can't imagine. But it's certainly not 50%. I'm just saying in the literature, it could be that the writers knew this fact about the world and still write about a God that bucks all of the trends that we know. That's possible. Is it likely? I don't think it's likely, but
Okay.
it's
Do you think there was
32%
something?
likely as opposed to the 68% that is not likely.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so you do okay, so that does make sense to me then. You again, I disagree with it, but again, that doesn't matter. So you think that look, on the background knowledge, it's more likely that to this degree that things that we can verify exist and things that we can't verify don't exist. You also think that it's likely that the biblical authors thought along the same lines as well. So, okay, in that
Yes.
case, I will grant this, and yeah, we will plug in 68% as background knowledge. Let me just okay, put that in. Okay, you go ahead and continue. I'm just
Okay.
putting my inflation
Look,
in.
the number that appears at the beginning of this is just going to dominate the chart, but I thought it was funny. And so I put it in because it was also close. And I said, yeah, this is my 53.14 item. So let's see. Figurative language is always used to describe the attributes of God. This is background knowledge that you would have with not just biblical literature, but all literature. This is just a literary thing. Um, Now, the reason it is so close to a 50% uh, likelihood of proving my case, um, it works the other way too. So when biblical writers write about God as if he were human and had human properties and traits, that could also be considered figurative language, anthropomorphic language about God that should not be taken literally, just as much as when they talk about God as this over the top thing with impossible features. That's also figurative language. So figurative language here works both ways. But I would contend that in the Bible, there is way more anthropomorphic language about God, bringing him down to a more human level than there is bringing him up to some exaggerated level. And if the authors of the Bible really thought that God was this exaggerated being so much greater, I think we would find more of the God is, greater than human and, all superpower. I think we would find that language more than we do the anthropomorphic language. But I think it's so close. It's such a close call that I can't really say for sure. And so at about 53%, um, I think that this helps to prove the case.
Yeah, I think I will. I think given your explanation, all right, yeah, that one's cool to me. I think that works as background evidence and stuff. And one thing I just want to clarify, even though me and David are trying to do it properly and test out whether something is truly background evidence versus evidence proper, in terms of the calculation, the numbers, even if you screw up, it doesn't matter because all you'll see what we do at the end. It's just multiplying. You're going to end up with the same answer, regardless of whether you consider everything in the evidence category or you consider everything background evidence. If you or screw things up, either way, we're all multiplying everything. So the numbers are going to be the exact same. So if you're worried about, oh my gosh, like I said, me and David in the last show, sometimes we screwed up too, because it is difficult at times, right? But at the end of the day, the numbers will be the same. So you don't have to sweat it that much. It's just maybe you'll get a scolding from your professor if you call, well, this is technically background evidence. So, but anyway, I just wanted to clarify that for the sake of layman in the audience who might be worried, like, this is so tough. How am I supposed to figure out whether it's background or just direct evidence? At the end of the day, who cares if you get it wrong? Just plug in the numbers, give an argument that speaks to the truth or falsity of the hypothesis, specific hypothesis, and you'll be multiplying out. You'll get the same numbers at the end. So, with that said, yeah, let's go back to trying our best to do it the proper way, though.
Okay, these last two might get thrown out for two reasons. One, the numbers are high enough to blow the curb, so it might actually detract from what I want to see done here. But the other things is these might be questionable as background knowledge, but they're in there anyway, and I just want to argue them for a second. There are places where God is not. So I could stop there and try to push this as a background
I,
knowledge
I would
thing.
I would say that this is direct evidence, though, right?
Yeah, but right. So if you take the next sentence, Christian hell is defined by God's absence, exist exists. Okay, that exists in the literature. I should have just put it in parentheses, but there are places that God is not is background knowledge. We know that there are places where God is not. You can ask me to prove that, but that seems like background knowledge to the um, idea that the writers of God thought that he was omnipresent. Uh, so we can go into evidences to prove this, but it's common background knowledge that there are places where he isn't.
Okay. Oh, okay. Now I get. There are places where God is not. I thought you were saying there are places in the Bible that say God is not omni, not an omni thing. But you're saying no. Okay. So what I would change here, just say God is ontological absence, right? Because obviously the comeback is no. Hell is not defined that way. He's relationally absent, but he's ontologically present. But again, going with your thing, if you want your argument to be, would you say you have 98% confidence that the Bible is saying hell is defined as God's ontological absence? Like he's not even sustaining hell in existence at all? Or
Yes, but here, let me just help to make this uh, a little bit better. I'll just throw this in parentheses, and we can decide to leave it in or not. But I would say that actually, I don't even think the Bible would describe hell as being a place where God is not. That's honestly what Christians say hell means. And so when I said that this idea exists in the literature, I really mean it exists in the literature as defined by academic Christians. So, uh,
is literature, you mean because your hypothesis about the Bible, that's the only literature I care about.
right,
Okay.
I understand that, and I am explaining in this parenthetical statement that I'm cheating
Okay.
because I actually don't believe that that's how the Bible describes hell. But if you ask the average modern ivory tower Christian, they will tell you that hell is the absence of God. And so just taking that definition, I am using as background places, evidence that there are places where God is not. I would also say that God is not in hell ontologically, and that can probably be shown as the Bible too. But if we had to prove this statement, that's maybe another whole show, maybe not a whole show.
But
But notice I'm not saying that God is not aware. Um, I'm saying that he's not there. But if I were really arguing, and I do understand the difference there, I thought about this a lot before I put this in there. But if I were arguing this honestly, I think that I would even say that God is not aware of what goes on in hell because it is God's. it is the place where God completely shuts off his presence, his knowledge, his mercy, his understanding, in the same way that he can take our sins and remember them no more. Uh, those that choose to lock themselves out of God's presence will be able to successfully do it. And so he will not be there listening to you scream or listening to you cry out for mercy or whatever you think hell is. That's what I would argue theologically. Um, but either way, I don't think that the statement is wrong if we just limit it to there are places where God is not.
Okay.
You can call on me to prove it, but
Well,
my understanding is I don't have to prove my background knowledge at this stage. It's just either proper background knowledge or it's not.
so this is not background knowledge. This is direct evidence, but I would say it's an utter failure because you are directly contradicting some of your established background knowledge where you say figurative language is always, and that you included Bible verses saying God is omnipresent. No, he's not. That's just figurative language. So I think this would be a failure, whether it's background knowledge or evidence. This thing fails because you're contradicting your own background knowledge about figurative language, right? So uh yeah, you can't prove unless you want to change your mind about this figurative language thing. Like
No,
it's
I'm not going to change my mind about the figurative language thing. I was trying to find a way to strike through this,
oh,
and I do not know. Is there a keystroke for strike through? It doesn't matter.
I don't even know what you're using.
Is
This
there a keystroke for
word here,
underline?
just delete key is what I would use, but
Yeah, well, underline. So no, I don't want to delete it. I want people to know it's there.
okay.
I want
Maybe
people to see my protest.
highlighted in red, I guess, to make
Yeah, that doesn't work here. This I'm doing it in Markdown, but it doesn't matter. That's fine. Um, we will just say X. Now that let's just add a couple more X's. uh, and so that means that we have stricken this one from the page. I'm not going to argue it overly because I expected it to be stricken. I just wanted my chance to argue it. There will be people who are thinking that my argument has been cheated because this is actually a strong piece of evidence, but I will accept all of the things that were said because I thought about some of them myself. Um, and I don't want to blow the equation with a 98% number if I can help it. So I'm happy to get rid of it.
oh,
All right. And the last piece of background knowledge, again, same category. Fully expect to throw X's here, but I'm just going to make the case anyway. There are things God cannot choose to do. And again, the rest of this is parenthetical.
right away. This isn't background. You're appealing to Bible verses of saying, look, we have evidence. This supposedly you're going to go. This is against omnipotence. I'm assuming, right? Um, I'll let you
Yeah,
do it.
it's it goes against omnipotence if we already know that there are things that God cannot choose to do. As background knowledge, that
Oh,
helps us evaluate whether the authors thought that God was omnipotent. And
no, okay.
I'm making the claim that I already have background knowledge that there are things that God can't do.
I was about to say something, but it doesn't. I was gonna try to make this background knowledge. What I was gonna say is like, forget about the Bible telling you can't do stuff. Um, Obviously, as a morally perfect being, an omni moral being or omni benevolent being, there are things that he can't do or something like that. But
Would that work?
it wouldn't because your hypothesis is again about the Bible's description. So like you would need to.
Right, and I'm arguing that the Bible doesn't describe God as an omni being, and so
So in that case, this would be direct evidence, not background knowledge. You're saying, look, the Bible says he's not
okay,
omnipotent.
I will I will oops, I will take
7, 8.
my win, and we will keep that at 78%. And the reason it's 78% and not 100%, because I absolutely know and can absolutely prove that there are things that God cannot do in the literature. But I would go back to counter this, the idea that the authors of the Bible could have simply been sloppy and slipped up and written in some things that look like limitations to God and still be thinking in a contradictory way in their head that this God can do anything, that he's omnipotent. Or
You know,
they might have had some idea. Let me just say this because this is also part of my thought process. They may have had some idea that he was all powerful based on a certain set of things. He can do things that are logically possible, would be a limitation, maybe, or he can do things that are morally within his uh, purview, within his nature. But they were, and so that's how they define omnipotent, and that they were not talking about he could do just anything and not even just anything that could be done. So just
but
given that, I'm giving it a 78%. I don't think they were thinking in that fine a detail though, and I think that it's pretty strong background knowledge to show, even though you say it's not background knowledge. I think that it strongly shows that they were not thinking of this God as all powerful because they specifically put in things that they said he couldn't do.
okay, so I think that there's a slight problem then in your hypothesis, and this is where you would need to spell out, okay, the Bible does not describe God as an omni being or an omni God, whatever it was your hypothesis was on there, because now you're redefining omni. You're using omni God in the proper philosophical sense in your other reasons, and then here you're saying you're considering that, well, by omnipotent we have some non-omnipotent meaning.
Well, I'm not considering that at all, really. I am just saying that this is something that the opposition could say. This is a possible objection that someone could raise. I think they're wrong on the face of it.
But if
Uh,
that's true, then that would support your hypothesis, because that you would say, well, look, it calls him omnipotent, but yeah, but that's not an omni God then,
well,
because
that is my hypothesis. I think they would be wrong about that, but I'm trying to get inside of the minds of the writers,
well,
and
I'm just saying
I'm trying to
even
give the writers as much possibility of what they may have been thinking of as possible. And so they could have put in some things that we see as limitations on God and still have been thinking that he was an all-powerful being, just thinking about it in some different way. They didn't
but,
see the inconsistency, and
but that isn't
inconsistency is not proof that God, that they were not trying to write an all-powerful God. It's just proof that they were stupid at
yeah,
a
so
time of the writing.
let's assume they were stupid then. You've 100% proven they were stupid in this way. That doesn't falsify your hypothesis, because your hypothesis is that the God of the Bible, the authors did not describe him as an omni God. If they had a different meaning for the word omnipotent than is entailed by an omni God, then that doesn't speak against your hypothesis at
Well,
all.
I
So
agree. I agree with that. But remember, this is kind of two phases for me, and I could have almost put two numbers beside each of the things that I'm numbering. Yes, I'm looking in absolute terms of what the literature says about this God, and that's the main thing that I'm looking at. But I'm also tempering my opinions on what I think the authors were really trying to convey. And so I'm also trying to filter out mistakes that they have made, or misstatements that they have made, to get at the true heart of the God that they were trying to describe. And I would say, even when you look at that, even when you factor that in, it it still seems unlikely that they had an omni God in mind.
yeah, but yeah, like that's what I'm saying is that even factoring that in, you shouldn't have gone down to 78%. You should still be at whatever. If that's the only counter response that you considered, I don't, did you consider other ones? But if
That's the
that's
main one. That's
okay,
the main one, because it is indisputable that there are things that God cannot choose to do.
then I think
So
I again,
100% thing in the literature, and yet I'm trying to find enough generosity uh, to say, but that doesn't necessarily prove my case. If
okay. And by in the hypothesis itself, God, the God of the Bible is not an omni God. By quote unquote omni, you're not talking about omni proper in the philosophical definition that we know today. You're talking about in the eyes of the biblical authors, he wasn't seen as omni.
Yeah,
Then
and I suppose there's a muddy mixture of that, because I'm considering both. But when I look at a piece of literature, what I care more about is what the author intended. And that, of course, you can't really know. That's a type of clairvoyance. It's a type of mind reading. And the way we read minds is one person tells you what's in their mind, and then it is in your mind. And then you still have to interpret that to understand what they meant. And so when they try to convey something about God, the effort for me from a literary perspective is to understand what they meant, not what I meant, not what we mean today, not what philosophers mean, but what they mean.
yeah, but in terms of your hypothesis, none of that matters in terms of what you mean. What are you trying to prove? Now, obviously, in the considering the evidence, yeah, you have to consider what did the authors actually intend to say. But in terms of your hypothesis, are you trying to prove that the biblical God is not omni in the modern sense of the word, or are you saying he wasn't seen as omni according to the biblical authors' standards of omni, which could be less than
So it's both. I don't know why I'm trying to defend uh,
what's
lowering the
it's
number as I did, but here's the other thing that I think was in my mind at the time, which is interpretation. So the Bible says some things, but we know the Bible uses figurative language. But I also believe it is impossible to know exactly what any particular passage means at any given moment. And so there is always a baked in high probability or possibility that we're simply misinterpreting the information that's there. And so places that clearly say that God cannot do this, or that God could not do this, that his power was limited, might just be us misinterpreting a thing. And you can hear plenty of sermons, read plenty of articles, which I did, by the way, before writing this down, um, of preachers and Christians explaining away all of those things where I would say, and we'll get into this in the evidences, but they have explanations for what those things really mean and how they really don't limit God's power. So I am giving it,
okay.
a 32 or 22% chance that that is correct.
Okay. So if this is how I'm understanding, and we can incorporate the 7-8%, then because you said either or in your hypothesis. So either the philosophical standard of omni, or he what the ancient biblical author understanding of omni. And what you're saying here is that there are things God cannot do, such as lie. And according to you, obviously that would violate the philosophical thing because he's all powerful or something like that. And then we can have counters on the philosophical thing where I think we can defeat this. Again, that doesn't matter. This is your assessment. But there's also this thing where you're saying you're 78% confident that the biblical authors thought that the inability to lie meant that God was not omni. If that's
Yes.
what you're saying, then okay, cool, 78%. So I'll plug that in as an evidential factor. Okay.
Yeah.
Your thing is very complex thing because you've got the two senses
This
of
is all
knowing.
complex though, and I picked this topic because I've been thinking about it for a while, and I haven't done a show on it or anything like this. It's the closest thing I've come to actually doing a show. I haven't written an article. This is the closest thing I've come to writing an article. I haven't even talked about it in public, but it's been on my mind. And so, if we're going to do this exercise, I wanted to do it on something that was real.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm just again clarifying for that audience. Remember, when we're talking about God, biblical God is not an omni God. There are two senses of the word omni that David's saying the God of the Bible doesn't match up to. The modern philosophical sense of the word omni, like all the omnipotent stuff like that, but also the ancient biblical authors' understanding of what an omni God was. The biblical God doesn't measure up to that either.
Right.
Okay, cool. What's next?
Okay, so we get into evidences. I think we can get through this pretty quickly, but I have not assigned numbers, and so people will see me thinking in real time.
Cool.
It's not pretty. It's like making sausage.
Okay.
Um, so I'm pretty sure all of this would count as evidence. So uh, now the we had a couple of these that you said would have been better as evidences and not background evidences. I'm not going to lobby to push them into this, although I only one, two, three, four. Looks like I've got four evidences here, and I really don't need that many. But if I could lobby to take one of these into evidences, I'm happy to leave the other behind. So that said, I will leave it up to you because I'm happy either way. Which one, the first one or the last one, in my background knowledge that was actually evidence, which one would you allow me to bring into my evidences file?
Let's do the 57% just because that one's different. And you have your first evidence, the chariots thing is basically the same argument as this one, just with a different example. Instead of lying, he can't defeat chariots. So let's do the 57% one. That's different.
Right. Okay. And to clarify to the audience, I used passages from the text because my argument is about the literature. And so that's where the evidence would be found. Uh,
Exactly.
all right. So the laws of logic require that an omnigod must maintain its status as an omnigod, OG equals OG, and cannot be less than omni-God at any time for any reason. Now, when Jesus emptied himself of his properties as God, according to Paul, I would argue that that means that Jesus was less than God, at least in some way, at that time. And that means that at that time, even the New Testament writers would say that God was not omni.
Cool. Yep. Like I said, I know where I would dispute you, and I think where you're going wrong with that. So if I saw that, this would be a perfect way to go identify. Thanks to you breaking up this way and giving your percentages, I'd be like, oh, whoa, you've got that wrong. The Bible doesn't say Jesus is less than omni, and you say, oh yes, it does, and that's where we would debate it and have our argument and stuff. But yeah,
If Jesus empties himself of anything, I mean, if God empties anything, then he's less than what he was, and so it doesn't even matter what you say he emptied himself of. He emptied himself of something. I would love to have that. I think we have had that argument on SNS
we did a
before,
4 hour show on it.
but I could do that for Paul's Jesus. I could do it for the gospel writers' Jesus, and in fact, I could do it without Jesus because most of the Bible doesn't know anything about Jesus. I know we would argue about that because prophecy and so forth. But I'm just kind of using that Jesus example
Yeah.
because it's a New Testament thing. I could have easily picked out some Old
No, that's
Testament thing for that.
perfect. That's a perfect example, right? Like, yeah, this is about you and your reasons and stuff. And I'm just pointing out to you, yeah, like obviously we would debate that because I might disagree and stuff like that. So
Yeah, and I think my 57% number may even be a little bit low the more I think about it, but I'm
we
going to keep it low because I think
see where
the
the count.
counters are valid enough because I'm already factoring in the counters that you're thinking about for that argument. So rather than prosecute that here, I will simply recognize that my interpretation could be wrong. I don't think it is, but I think it's a good 57. I think it's more than half proof, especially as Christians talk about Jesus.
Awesome.
Um,
So
so, all right. So the second evidence, since this is about the God of the text, my evidence is based on the. Okay, that was just a prelude. Sorry. So I've got three here. So I just put up scripture references. If I put this online, it should look a little bit cleaner. Depends on how it handles this markdown code here. I don't know. And the Lord was with Judah, and he drave out, because this is an old English thing. He drave out the inhabitants of the mountain, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley because they had chariots of iron. I believe this was as literal a description as you kind of get of a god, even recognizing that all language about God is figurative. But the war is literal, and the chariots are literal, and the places, the mountain versus the valley, were literal. And so it doesn't make sense if an author thought that God could do anything to make him sound like, in this list of literal things, that he couldn't do it. And so, for at least this author, the author of Judges, and we have no idea who that is, he did not think that God was all powerful. Now, I don't have to prove that every author didn't think that God was all powerful, just that some in the literature, enough in the literature to um, make the case that within the literature, God is not all powerful. That's really hard to do, because then I'd have to do a statistical analysis of literature and talk about all the places where it seems that he's all powerful versus all the places that he's not uh, all powerful. But so that's why I'm just picking out a couple of clear passages here. And I didn't do as much work on my counters as I wanted to, but I just wanted to explain that this does seem to be a place where interpretation, it's really hard to misinterpret this. Figurative language is really hard to see any figurative language here. This author has something that God cannot do, and I don't know what was in his mind, why he couldn't do it, or whatever. But I'm going to put this at 74%.
four.
4.
And good, you covered your both angles, right? Where you talked about obviously again, you've considered the counters where they say you are misinterpreting this and stuff,
Yes.
find that wanting, so that's part of the 74. Secondly, you not only obviously under your interpretation, being unable to beat people because of chariots of iron, that's not omnipotent. You should be able to defeat chariots of iron in the philosophical sense. But you also took into account he wasn't omnipotent according to this biblical author's understanding of the word omnipotent. And again, whether it's true or false, we're not debating it, but you took that, you did that aspect of your hypothesis as well, because according to you, this author establishes elsewhere that he does think that omnipotence would entail defeating chariots of iron, and here all of a sudden he can't do it. So all of this is considered in the 74, correct?
Right.
Okay, cool. Okay, I've plugged in
Right.
74.
And in fact, if someone wants to know, this is probably an evidence that you could use to say this was an actual historical event, even if it wasn't recounted accurately, even if the names were different, if the tribes were different, it doesn't matter. This is something that, because of the criteria of embarrassment, which, by the way, is a criteria I really do not like or respect. But that said, you might say the author would have no reason to put this embarrassing idea that God couldn't defeat chariots of iron. And so clearly, some people that he thought was God's people lost a battle, and he had to put up some reason why he lost it. And so it kind of suggests that the battle may have happened. Whether any of the details of the battle are recounted accurately or not is irrelevant. Just wanted to throw that out there too. This is one of those kind of things. Has nothing to do with my argument.
Keep going. I think
All
we're
right. Genesis, blah, blah, blah. King James, as we know, the only version that God has laid his miraculous mathematical code onto.
is this the 1769 version though? Because
You
that's
know,
what
it is in my
it has to
heart.
be.
It, so, and the Lord said,
Oh, the
because the
abridged.
cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether, I don't know why that got jammed together, see whether uh, they have done all together according to the cry of it, which is come unto me, and if not, I will know. All right, King James Version, very hard to just rattle off sometimes. What this is, though, is a very famous scene where uh, even Christians who haven't read their Bibles probably have heard of, which is where in this event of Sodom and Gomorrah, whoever wrote this story or whatever sources this story ultimately came from, they were envisioning a God who had uh, a limited view on the world, and this is actually a fairly common theme in this part of the Bible. I would add too. So in this case, God, he's heard the cry of the evil. How did he hear it? I don't know. He didn't just know it, but he's heard the cry, but he doesn't have the details of it. He's heard it was really bad, but he doesn't know how bad it is. And so he goes down in whatever way he goes down to take a look at it. And the last three words of this passage, um, I will know, or the last six words, and if not, I will know. There's a conditional statement here, really strongly suggesting that he has to figure it out. Now, that's not an image that we'd like to have of God or that Christians like to have of God, but it's really hard to call all of this figurative because he uses a lot of anthropomorphisms to suggest that God doesn't know this, but he's going to go and find it out. This is also consistent with, God using messengers to come back and forth and give him reports and things. Like I said, this is fairly common, I think, in this part of the Bible, and because of that, in other contexts where God doesn't seem to know things, it seems like a pretty strong possibility that the writer of this text was not envisioning a God who automatically knew all the details about everything. So, for that reason,
Go ahead.
82%.
This 82% again. You're considering all of the, to the best of your knowledge, all of the counters that interpret this verse in a way that's not contradictory to the omnis,
Yes,
omni, philosophical omni, and also this biblical author's understanding of omni, or even just the biblical authors in general, right?
yes.
Okay, cool.
The literary cues just don't allow those objections to be very likely, but I'm still allowing for some element of those objections to be possible.
Okay, cool. What next and last one?
Okay. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. This, again, a very popular passage in the story of Job. And what I want to show here is that God has location, at least as far as this author is concerned. God was in his heaven, Job was in his earth. And to get to God, you had to go to his heavenly court. You had to have a passkey. A God who is omnipresent is not local anywhere. He's present everywhere, and you would never have to go to a physical place to meet with God. And yet we have God's courtiers in this particular place where he is. And we have Satan as one of God's courtiers, which is a different discussion altogether, in this place where God is. This is where they had to go to talk to God. And so God is localized, at least in this uh, passage where Job is. So just further clarification, that does not mean that God does not have reach beyond his local place, or that he is not aware of things beyond his local place. But it does suggest that he is localized. And because throughout the Bible, in particular the Old Testament, where there are lots of examples of God being localized and people having to go to him or him being in a particular place, I do believe that not just this author, but many authors believe that God was localized and not present physically, whatever physical means, spiritually, whatever the stuff of God is. He wasn't everywhere, but he was in one place at a time, even though he could be aware. In the same way that I am in this room in my house, but it can also be said that I'm in my house. I'm also in my neighborhood. I'm also on the planet Earth. I'm also in the galaxy. If you see how this works, um, it's true that I'm in all of those places. But if you really want to talk to me, you're going to have to come to my house in my room to talk to me. And this is how God is described here. So I just wanted to lay that out a little bit. That's why I think this and other passages shows that that the authors did not think of God as omnipresent.
Okay. So what's your probability?
Yeah, I was doing some of that talking to talk myself uh, through to it because I am aware of the counters, but
Yeah, like well, that I always ask, have you considered a kind of like, I mean, obvious counter with this one? I mean, think of, look, the Bible authors themselves talk about God's omnipresence and say, well, how can he be localized in a temple? Isn't he beyond the skies and stuff like that? So all of that
right. But the
is
fact that that was even a debate in the Bible would show that some thought he was local. That would actually bolster the position. So some, I I agree that there are things in the Bible that could be interpreted as God being everywhere. I looked at some of those passages. I wrote a few down in my counter, so we'll
yeah,
get there. Those
right.
will be interesting. But
But
I
just for the
I
audience to confirm, all of those counters, this is included in your assessment of the 68%. Like
yes,
in interpreting this verse, you considered all the counters. So okay,
yes.
cool. Okay, so
I
six.
mean, if I didn't, I assure you this would be in the 90s. And so I'm just giving,
Cool.
this is how much credence is 32%. I'm giving that much credence that despite all of the evidence of God being localized in various places in the Bible, that some of the counter evidence that's in the Bible could mean that too. But I mean, I've read them, I looked at them, I know what they say, and they actually seem to be very situational. So we'll get into that. But those are my evidences.
Yeah.
I think these will go pretty quick unless you just want to talk about them. Luke 132. So these are counter evidences, things I had to consider. Just understand, I considered way more than this.
Mhm.
For nothing will be impossible with God. All right. If we just take that one verse, it is a verse. It says that nothing will be impossible with God. All things are possible with God is another. I think you would find that in Matthew. They're talking about the same event, but if you just take that out of context, it definitely sounds like it's saying that God can do anything, that he's omnipotent, right? And I understand that that's how many Christians um, understand those passages. I would just say they are wrong. They are very wrong because those passages in particular pertain to very specific things. This is, where God is saying a rich man cannot. It's easier for camel to enter through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. And his disciple says, well, if that's true, who can enter heaven? And Jesus says, with God is not possible, but I mean, with man is not possible, but with God all things are possible. That's the context. This is not a statement of omnipotence. It is a statement uh, that is really zeroed in on the question of how we are saved. And so I think that when Christians look at this and other passages, this is just an example, uh, to prove that God is omnipotent, uh, it's it's a very kind of a desperate effort to find something in the Bible to say that. It just doesn't. And this isn't that thing. So that said, as a counter evidence, it doesn't get above 50% for me
Right.
because I think the literature is wrong. And so if I understand the procedure, we shouldn't include this at all because whatever number I put on this as uh, being likely to counter that God is omnipotent is going to be lower than 50%.
Cool. Yeah, and just for the sake, put a number anyways, just so the audience can see it. But so I wanted to interrupt at this point. I was waiting to see where you'd put it at 33%, right?
Yep.
So David is absolutely correct. In my Bayesian approach, when we're putting it together, what he's calling counter evidence, I just call negative evidence. But this is him basically saying, based on the evidence of this verse, and he's considered all the interpretations. Again, this is about where David is. I get that Christians are going to, oh, he's totally wrong. I think he's wrong about some of the stuff he's saying and stuff like that. But that doesn't matter. That's what we do afterwards. Right now, we're just kind of, what are David's reasons for thinking? And he's given us his subjective level of credence that this doesn't prove God is omnipotent in any philosophical way, and it also doesn't prove that he was omnipotent in the eyes of the biblical author's understanding. So he's assigned this only 33% proof that this proves God is omnipotent in at least one of those senses. And because it's 50% or less, that doesn't it doesn't entail that there's a 67% probability that his hypothesis is true necessarily, just because this verse isn't saying that um God isn't omni. But well, let me ask you, David. So if we're going to decide whether we should include this or not, so I get that you say this verse doesn't necessarily isn't saying that God is omnipotent.
This verse is representative of a lot of verses that I looked at. And so
It doesn't matter. I'm just saying this verse doesn't say he is omnipotent. Do you think this verse is actually positively saying that he isn't
oh
omnipotent?
no, no, I don't think it's saying that. I think
Okay.
it's not saying anything. It's saying that um, nothing is impossible with God, but it's in a very specific and constrained context, and so it doesn't address the issue of whether God is omnipotent or not. And the reason I say this is a representative passage, every verse that I looked at that Christian said this proves that God's omnipotent falls into the same category. It's not a statement of God's overall omnipotence to be able to just do anything. It's very constrained within a particular context. I would argue that there are zero passages in the Bible that suggest that God is omnipotent in a philosophical way,
Okay.
uh,
Or in the eyes of the biblical
or
authors.
in the eyes of the biblical authors. There's zero such passages. They're either very clouded by obviously figurative language, uh, or they're very constrained in their context. And I can see why Christians would think, taken all together, surely God is omnipotent, but the Bible actually never says he is.
Okay, cool. Again, it's you've explained yourself. Who cares about that? We're not debating that. But the point here with the numbers is, okay, well, should this be included in the calculation or not? And in this case, because it's 50% or less, it shouldn't. Why? Because you are admitting that this verse isn't saying the opposite. It's not only does it not say that God is omnipotent, so it doesn't falsify your hypothesis, but you're also saying there's no way that this verse counts as evidence in favor of your hypothesis either. It doesn't speak to the truth or falsity of your hypothesis. It's talking about something else.
Right. And the reason I give it any credence at all is not written down here at all. But the credence factor of not of making this number 33% and not lower is that uh, major theologians throughout time have suggested that the Bible suggests that God is omnipotent. And so I could simply be misreading it. And lots of people who read this literature come up with a different opinion. So I'm gonna, that's really why the 3% not lower than what it is. It's just a
It's
level of
fine. But the,
humility that I could be wrong. But from my study and what I see of the literature, they're wrong when they say that. And when they use this kind of evidence, they're not showing that God is omnipotent. In fact, they're showing that they really don't have anything better to show that God is omnipotent than some of these misapplied passages.
Okay, no, I totally get that. I don't care. Like the point that I'm trying to make is, should we include this or not?
No,
There could be two ways, right? So I just for the audience, I want to be able to say this, right? So if he's just saying there's a third, and this is what David is saying as he's explained, there's only at best 33% proof that this thing is saying God is omnipotent in one of the relevant senses, one or both of the relevant senses. And that's not good enough to count as negative evidence that falsifies his hypothesis that the biblical God is not omnipotent in those senses. However, if David it was also saying, again, same number, 33%, but let's say he was saying, when you actually understand this verse, it's actually positive evidence in favor of my hypothesis. When it's saying it's nothing's impossible with God, when you understand it in context, it's actually saying God is not omnipotent. If that's what David thought this verse said, that's where you would go 100% minus 33. That's the equivalent of saying there's a 77% proof based on this text.
67, but who's counting?
67, sorry. And that
Yeah,
would
can you
count.
give me change for $1?
Yeah, look, I want to make sure the audience understands that. So
Yeah, go
that's
ahead.
where I would include the 67% in the calculation, because then it would be a negative evidence. But
Yeah.
here, David's saying that actually, no, it's just irrelevant. It's not a negative evidence. It doesn't prove or falsify. And therefore, since it's less than 50%, we just ignore it. So I hope that's clear for the audience. I wanted
Yeah.
them to understand that. But
I
yeah,
think it is. And if I had spent more time, I would have come up with better negative evidences. But I just, I wanted to put that in there anyway, because I know that that's a piece of evidence that a lot of Christians like to use.
oh, all
So
right.
I didn't want to make it look like I was ignoring something that Christians would say, but you missed this obvious passage.
Here's
Um,
I have another question before you
mhm,
move on. And so it's another clarification question with your hypothesis, where I realize there's a problem here. Let's pretend the next two are successful negative evidences or something.
mhm.
Now, when you say the biblical God, what do you mean? What is the biblical God? Because you've admitted the biblical God could be contradictory. So there could be 100% proof that in some biblical texts, God is omni.
Yes, absolutely.
So how would we relate that to your hypothesis if there's truly a contradiction? It does.
It would be a much longer show and a much larger analysis, but on the balances that suggest he is omni versus the balance of texts that suggest he's not omni, as I have collated over a long period of time of study that I have not put down or quantified for this example. But that's what I'm taking into effect. So I
Okay, so
recognize that there are passages that can be used. In this case of God's all powerfulness, I actually don't believe there are any passages that say he is. Um, Not reading the text correctly. I don't think so. He's real powerful. He's powerful enough to do everything he wants to do. He has all the power that matters, but he's not all powerful in some philosophical way.
okay, cool. Okay, cool. So for our purposes here, we when we say the biblical God, we have to say that there's some way to harmonize these things to have a biblical concept,
Yeah,
just for the
see,
sake
I'm
of
not
argument.
trying to harmonize. That's the thing. I'm doing an informal statistical analysis because I recognize that in some cases, maybe not with the power thing, but in some cases, it's just contradictory. Some might say he does know everything, and some will say he doesn't know everything, because we're dealing with different authors in different places at different times with different God concepts, um, and so on a balance of all of that. It's not harmonizing so much, but if you look at the balance of it, is he mostly all power limited? And I would say he's mostly limited. And that's even if you could come up with one passage that says he's all powerful. There are mountains of passages more that says he's not.
Okay, so then I think if I what you would have to do in this case is you would just modify your hypothesis a bit. Don't say the biblical God because you don't know what that is. There's contradictory, there's multiple notions according to you, kind of thing. So just say a
Yeah,
valid.
he's a composite god. you know.
Irrelevant, right? So I'm just saying for you, if you want to prove your hypotheses with the evidences you have, say a valid biblical concept of God is so it's one valid among many valid ones or something, right? Because the way you've had it now, it's like you're saying there's only
Oops.
one valid biblical concept of God, and that is not an omni thing. But if there's a contradiction, obviously there is a valid conception in the Bible of God as omni. So yeah, that's just the note that I would do is I would tweak your hypothesis to be more specific. Yeah. And then everything you have here is perfect. Cool.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Negative evidence number two. Hopefully we do better here. Probably won't. 1 John 3:19-20 ESV, folks. Where did I get that from? Just put it in there. By this we shall know that we are of the truth and reassure. Look, I'm having trouble. Will you just read this? Because you'll do it better than me. I think you're muted or something.
Sorry, say that again. My thing, it keeps it froze again. But one thing I'm noticing throughout this is there's like multiple 2 second periods where you become like static or something. I noticed that the last time we did the show too. So I don't know
Look,
what.
the freeze ray is a powerful weapon. Sometimes it backfires. Would you would you would you mind just reading out this passage because my eyes are crossed too much to do it very well now?
Okay, so by this we shall know that we are of the truth and reassure our heart before Him. For whenever our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart, and He knows everything.
Okay, so here is an example of a writer saying that God knows everything. I do believe this is figurative and poetic, but I also, more than that, think it's specific. And this is the problem with using these types of passages out of context. The writer here is talking about the secret things of the heart, things that you're hiding that God might not know. And the author is saying, God knows the heart. He knows everything. And I think the parenthetical here would be He knows everything about the condition of your heart. And there are other passages in the Bible that talk about God as a person knowing everything in the domain of humans. He knows everything about us. He knows we're wicked or, in our mother's womb. Poetic, but once again, it's a particular domain. Um, Other things that would say he knows, the hairs on your head. He knows the sparrows, the number of sparrows, and when they need to eat. Um, there are very specific things like that that talk about what God knows in very exaggerated language, but also in very specific domains. Now, when taken together, because none of these things, there's no place in the Bible where it just outright says God knows everything in the way that we mean philosophically. It never says that. It always is talking about something very specific. But if you take all of that together, if you put it together, mash it together, and form a composite picture of this God, it could seem like the authors are saying God knows everything about everything. Now, this relies heavily not on the words they say, but on what I think they might be thinking. Because all of the words are poetic and uh, everything about God is in figurative language. So I'm giving the authors the benefit of the doubt here. If you just put it all together, all of the authors, all of the things they say, it can show you a picture of a God that knows everything. And I am willing to give that a shocking 61% that this could be a counter evidence.
Okay, so I love that because I want the more than 50 to kind of lower your probabilities bit. But I do see a problem here, and I should have mentioned it before, but it's okay, so this actually doesn't 61% is totally wrong, right? Because even if the count pretend you were out to lunch about this, let's say the Christians are right. This is saying God is omniscient. God's being omniscient, having that one property doesn't mean he's an omni being because it says nothing about him being omnipotent, omnipresent. Now, when you did your positive evidences, if you could deny one property, because in order to be an omni being, you have to have all the omni properties. So denying one of them is enough to prove your hypothesis. But here, just proving that he's omniscient, even if you pretend that that is what you're 61% convinced that this verse is saying God's omniscient, but that says that is he omnipotent? Is he omnibenevolent? Does he have the other omnis? So this doesn't actually falsify your hypothesis. You would need more.
So I thought about that objection,
Okay.
um, and that is uh, correct. But the reason, so with the positive evidences, yes, I was trying to show different aspects of omni that God was not, but I didn't show all aspects of omni that God was not. I didn't put anything in there that said God is not all loving. For instance, I didn't try to show that. Um, and yes, you're right. I only need to prove one to show that he's not the omni that many Christians say he is, but that would still leave the door open for them to say, okay, maybe he's not all loving, but he's still all powerful and all knowing.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So they would still have some version of an omni God. And so the best I'm trying to do is show a broader analysis of some of the omnis and say, he's not omni here, he's not omni here, he's not omni here. And so you are being um, fairly narrow to say, well, but he's omni here. Well, you've got to prove that because all of the other areas where you say he's omni, I'm showing that he's not. So it's I'm not making a comprehensive case there. I'm making enough of a case to show why one should doubt that the authors had this omni God in mind. Even if I can even if I pick at one scab, that doesn't mean that others aren't real. I'm just trying to pick at enough of them to make an overall case. Now, with this as a positive evidence, yes, you're right. If I show that he is all knowing, I haven't showed that he's anything else, but he would at least be all knowing. And I think it would be a judgment call for someone in the final analysis to say, well, he's all knowing, but not all powerful. Is he still omni enough? Uh, you know, there are like
Right.
7 omnis or 5 omnis that I know about anyway. But we could probably think of other omnis that aren't even considered omnis. And you could say, well, God is not omni that, but he's still an omni God. I could say that God is omni evil.
Okay.
And you would say, well, no, he's not omni evil, but that's not even a category. He's all the omnis that matter.
Okay.
So
So granted then, so I think that works with these then, right? So there are multiple ways to be an omni god as long as you have one of the essential
exactly,
properties. Could be. Now that's going to spell problems for your positive evidences then, because I don't think you've
exactly.
proven your hypothesis with any of the just denying that God is not I forget what your examples were. He wasn't omnipotent because of chariots. He wasn't omniscient for some reason.
Yeah, and he wasn't omnipresent.
Great, but you didn't prove he wasn't omnibenevolent. So
Exactly.
you haven't disproven an omni thing. So I guess you just want to, for the sake of argument, kind of assume you've done likewise with the rest or something, or
Well, yes, but also it's a matter of showing that some ideation of God is that God is not omni. When you say God is omni and you list, say, 5 categories, well, no single author in the Bible ever talks about God in terms of those 5 omnis. You have to take a lot of authors in a lot of places to put together those 5 omnis. And so I would argue that many concepts of God in the Bible don't contain all of the omnis. In fact, no concept of God contains all of the omnis, but some concepts might contain some of them. And I am saying that on a balance of looking at the God of the Bible and the scriptures, that he is largely, on balance, not considered an omni anything. Uh, but even if you find, you could find one thing where you say, but he's omni this, and that might destroy my hypothesis because you could say, well, he's omni this. Okay, great. Let's see if you can do that. But I'm trying to make it as fair as possible on both sides when I consider this. I agree. This is not an exhaustive argument to say that the Bible has no omni characteristics, because this would be a much longer document if I were to try to put that all here.
yeah. But you would, just for the sake of the audience, because of the way your thing is, you could, if we weren't just limited to doing 3 and 3, you're saying that you could provide the biblical evidence that denies all of it, or sorry, like you're saying in
I
this
could
case.
provide arguments that would eliminate the possibility of all of his omnis. Yes, I think I could.
Okay. And do you think on the opposite end that there are Bible verses that could prove all of his omnis as well as counter evidence, or
Not really. No. Um, but the thing again, the whole idea of all of his omnis is itself a very subjective thing. Because who said that God had 5 omnis? Was all loving, all powerful, all knowing, all present, and all something else. But that's a list that some humans came up with. It's just an arbitrary list. So I don't see any reason why I should have to prove some arbitrary list, because that's just somebody's conception of this God of the Bible. And I'm talking about the author's conception of this God of the Bible. And there are no authors that have expressed all of those omnis. So I don't see any reason why I should have to express all of those omnis here either.
okay, okay, cool. Yeah. So just so the audience knows then, yeah, like I'm just gonna treat it as though again, philosophical or biblical author understanding of omni. Either one for David, he has two targets. So therefore, the falsification of one omni counts towards the hypothesis. Straightforward, just denying that. For the positives, I'm just going to be charitable and pretend that, yeah, just proving one of them counts against his overall hypothesis. Let's just take it that way, so that way you see how the math goes, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't get bothered by technicalities of like, well, what's the hypothesis and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay, cool.
All right. Real quick. Review our prescription. Okay. Just looking at a text message. I'm expecting one that I didn't want to miss. Okay. And the last one, do me a favor and read that one because my eyes are still crossed.
Am I a God at hand, declares the Lord, and not a God far away? Can a man hide himself in secret places so that I cannot see him, declares the Lord? Do I not fill the heaven and the earth, declares the Lord? In other words, he sees you there in Luke, so behave. Um,
Right. Yeah. He knows what you're doing right now. And it probably has to do with this right here. I'm just putting it out there.
okay.
Um, let me see. Let me go back to this. Uh, I'm so sorry to slander you like this, Darren. Um,
It's just a joke.
yeah. So, yeah, this is a passage that Christians could use. I suspect that the majority of Christians who end up watching this didn't even know this passage was there, and they're saying, "Yes, yes, I can use it. I've got one." So,
Tony Costa
uh,
does a great job of doing this in his series. But
I
anyways,
mean, I mean, look, just thank the atheist for your latest Bible knowledge here. Now, let me tell you why it's not what you think it is. Even though it says what it says and it looks pretty clear, this is also obviously very poetic, very figurative language that I would say is in a particular domain. However, I think this was one of the passages that, if you look at it sideways, can be taken more generally than some of the other passages like this. But again, this is not so much talking about God being pandeist, being everything that is. This is about God's reach of knowledge. You can't hide. I'll see what you're doing. And even by seeing, the writer doesn't mean that God will physically see it with his eye beams. As we know, these authors also believed that God used messengers to go down and tell him things, and then he would go down and see. So, it's kind of like a king or a president or someone powerful, maybe a boss at a corporation saying, don't steal pencils. I'll see what you're doing. Doesn't mean that he's sitting there looking at a security camera seeing everybody, but that he has enough people reporting back to him to show what's going on. And so when this writer says that God will see you no matter where you are and what you do, you can't hide from him. It doesn't mean that he actually has a great big view of a giant globe and that he's seeing and processing everything all at once. It could mean that, but in this kind of language, there's no reason to believe it does mean that. Nevertheless, if we do take this language more literally, then I think the author of Jeremiah, considering the language that Jeremiah uses all through his book, declares the Lord, "Do I not fill heaven and earth?" Declares the Lord. "Do I not fill heaven and earth?" In other words, this is a statement that God of pandeism. If you take this literally, God is everything. He's not just everywhere in his knowledge, but he is physically actually present, filling with his substance everything. He is everything. Everything is him. And I do not believe that Jeremiah was actually presenting a pandeist God. So, with that, I think just the knowledge of that and the explanation of that should lower any Christian's confidence that Jeremiah was suggesting that God was physically located. But that said, he does say it. It's more clear than probably any other place you will find in there. And so we will leave, a greater than 50% chance that that is what Jeremiah meant, which he didn't, but we will give it this number. Oops.
9. Okay.
And so we got there. It's greater than 50%. But I'm just going to say, if you're reading your Bible like that, you're reading it wrong. You do not understand the literature.
Okay, hang on one second. Just perfect. Okay, so we've got all of these factors now. What actually, yeah, before we move on, so with these last two ones, hey, Christians have got a success, according to David here. We've falsified his hypothesis on a balance of probabilities. And so, but David's hypothesis is stated in quote unquote positive terms for him, right? We're trying to prove the hypothesis that God, the God of the Bible, is not an omni God.
I'm going to quit sharing my screen here. Sorry,
No,
because that's it.
keep sharing. Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. I can bring it back
Right.
up.
It's fine. Okay. Well, actually, bring it up just 1 minute kind of thing, right?
No problem.
Okay. The last two. Okay, so if we're going to convert so these are relevant. They need to go into Bayes' equation to get the total. But we wouldn't put in 61% because this is 61% falsifying his hypothesis. So we would have to go 100% minus 61% to convert that to its opposite, right? If there's a 61% probability that David's hypothesis is false given this verse, that means there's a 39%, I believe, 39% probability that his hypothesis is true given this verse. So in Bayes, we would put 39% up there if you want to write that down or something.
I'm not writing down the math.
Okay, okay.
Once again,
Um,
my notation skills and ability to show that on screen and put it into some formula that works, that would take a lot longer
you
than you
can't
count
just
for.
put equals 39% in positive terms or something, or 39% my hypothesis is true.
Oh, you want me to change to 39%?
Keep the say 61% your false, your hypothesis is false, equals 39% your hypothesis is true.
Okay.
Because when we put it in Bayes, we're putting in 39%. We're not putting in 61. Yeah, whatever you would understand.
Okay.
Okay.
That
And then
works for me.
same with the 59%. In order to convert that, 59% probability that David's hypothesis is false equals 100 minus 59 is 41% probability that your thing is true.
Hmm.
Okay, cool. So now you can stop sharing your screen and I'll share mine.
Okay. You got the other numbers, so you're good.
Yep,
You're good on
I've
that.
inputted everything along the way.
All right.
Now, I haven't, okay, so the problem is I haven't done the calculation yet, so I'm gonna need a couple minutes to do that. But in the meantime, David, now we've listened to the words. Forget the probabilities for a second. Let's do it your way, right?
Mhm.
Okay, you've given your subjective level of credence in words, and you've explained your reasons. We're all privy to your reasons. We're just assuming the way you've represented it is true.
Mhm.
Okay, so now, okay, make an overall judgment. Don't forget it. Forget about probabilities and numbers. What's your overall judgment? Do you believe this very strongly? Do you disbelieve your hypothesis? Where do you come out in terms of your overall subjective credence in words?
Oh, this one might be challenging because I considered a lot of things that aren't on the sheet, and so if I need to be confined to this stuff that we used and only
And
think about
anything
that,
said in this show that the audience would
yeah.
be privy to.
So I think uh, on a balance of probabilities, of subjective fuzzy probabilities, if I had to give that a number, I definitely
No, no
believe
numbers for right now.
no numbers.
Just
Okay,
in
well,
word.
I definitely believe that the Bible paints a picture of a God with limitations. So
Is
I'm absolutely certain of that. But now, breaking it down further to something more interesting, is that what the authors were intended to convey? That this God has some limitations. And I'm pretty sure that that is what they were intending to convey. Uh, it was a God who maybe couldn't do everything, but could do a lot of things. It could do all the things that mattered. Uh, he was everywhere he needed to be. He knew everything that he needed to know. Uh, and so that sort of thing. And I think that's overall the God they painted. Um, but there is a possibility that some writers definitely had a sense of God's um, omni nature. And even though no writer gave us, five omnis or so forth, it could be that some of the writers thought that God was omni in other categories that they did not write about. So even taking that into account, um, if there was a writer where that could show that you say that he thought God was all powerful, but he didn't say anything about God being all knowing, I think it's probably reasonable to say that if you had asked the writer that question, he would have said, "Oh yeah, he's all knowing too." Um, but on the whole, I think most writers didn't have that conception of God, and I'm just going to go with I am very I'm reasonably certain, but uh, there is room for doubt that the writers did not have an omni-God in mind.
okay. Okay, cool. So it's you believe it's very probable, possibly extremely probable with some minor doubts.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Okay.
and the doubts may be more a little more than minor, but they're certainly not major. I know you don't want me to put a number to it, but I would say that if not knowing is 50% and being absolutely sure is 100%, I would say that I was 75%.
I was just gonna say, yeah, now I want you to, given your subjective level of credences, so your overall just subjective credence without using Bayes, you would say overall, all the numbers and all the reasoning you gave, about 75% is what you're convinced, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's actually do the calculation using Bayes, and let's see um if that's right. So I would classify that as the very probable category. So, all right, let me share my screen. I haven't finished the calculation, so you're gonna have to watch me do it. But
Hey, that is must-see TV.
yeah, I know it's boring for people in math. So you see here, right? So I all these are all of the uh evidential inputs. Oh, and I forgot these two things. So these are all of the evidential inputs, right? These are the two negative evidence, successful negative evidences, where I just converted it to 39 and 41%, times the background knowledge. And I realized divided by the numerator again, plus one minus the numerator. So this is just the translates to the falsity of the hypothesis given the evidence times the fault internal prior probability of the false hypothesis, right? So I'm
It's
following.
not gonna matter. Based on the exercise we did yesterday, which was a surprising result, these negative numbers are not going to matter. That's my prediction. I have not done the math. So,
Yeah, well, okay, so we've got to do the math. So, okay, cool. So I've got to recalculate. So let's start with the numerator, right? So we have, in terms of this, this factor, the probability that David's hypothesis, the God of the Bible, is not an omni God, either philosophically or in the eyes of the biblical authors. That's what we have: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 evidences. Okay, two of which are negative. Okay, and we have two background evidences that make his hypothesis probable, according to David. So let's multiply. We have 0.57 times 0.74 times 0.882% times 68%, then times the negative 39%, times another negative at 41%. Okay, and now let's add in the background knowledge. So 0.5314, there's the t-shirt. And his last background at 68%. So, okay, so we get a total for the numerator of 0.0136 if you round up.
okay.
Okay, cool.
You went out there for about 15 seconds, so you might want to repeat some of that.
What was the last you heard?
I don't remember. But it was about 15 seconds, maybe 20. But your screen is still showing, so people can still see what you were doing.
Cool. So I just did the math. I multiplied across all of the six evidences, including the two negatives, and then I multiplied the two background evidences. This equals 0.0136. And then divided by, this is just the numerator again. And then we're calculating the falsity of David's hypothesis on the evidence. So we have to do 1 minus 57, 43, 1 minus 74, 26, and so on and so forth. 1 minus 82, I think it's 0.18, but just in case, 0.18. Okay, 1 minus 0.68, same thing. Just make sure I don't make any mistakes. I'm not going to assume or do it in my head. And then, okay, well, we know the opposite here, right? Because we did that. So we know there's a 61% chance for this first negative evidence, 0.61. And in this case, the second negative evidence, there's a 59% probability. Okay, then times the two background evidences. So 1 minus, so this is the prior probability that David's hypothesis is false. So 1 minus 0.5314, 0.4686 times 1 minus 0.68. And again, I'm going to do it on the calculator and show you every step. 0.32. Okay, so equals, so 0.0136 is the numerator, divided by 0.0136 as the numerator, plus now we have to multiply the falsity evidential factors and background evidences against David's hypothesis. So just straightforward multiplication: 0.43 times 0.26 times 0.18 times 0.32 times 0.61. Oops, we're helping the falsity, we're helping the Christians here. 0.59, okay, times the two background things, 0.4686 times 0.32, and this equals 0.003. Okay, so I'll 0.0004. I'll just round up arbitrarily 4 decimal places. So 7 rounds to 5, 5 you go up. So that's why I have 3 zeros and then 4. Okay, great. Equals 0.0136 divided by plus 0.0136 equals that's 0.114. Okay, did I do that right? 0.136 plus 0.004. Okay, yep, 0.014. And our final total. So David, you said on the numbers, so I noticed your subjective credences are a little bit not translating there, right? So you almost said extremely probable with very minor doubts. But on your number, you said about 75%. So again, that's just a minor translation issue. But when I think extremely probable, I'm thinking like 85 to 95 or
Well, I wanted to say very probable, which would be a little bit different from extreme, because it's hard to get into the heads of people who've
yeah.
been dead for 4,000 years.
All right, cool. Okay, cool. So either way, your words translated to what you meant is about 75% kind of thing. That's what you were expressing there.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the big what do we get? Oh my goodness, David, 97% is what you come out to. Approximately 97.1. So yeah, given all of these evidential factors, obviously the sheer number of positive ones and the fact that you only have two successful things, plus you've got a high prior probability. Yeah, you objectively speaking, if all of your individual inputs were a correct assessment, you should believe extremely probable. You should be 97% convinced or thereabouts.
Mm.
So there, that's where you can kind of see where Bayes helps because
Bayes
we are
did not
all
help because my initial statement was true. I believe it to about, if I had to put a number on it, about 75%. All that does is show that I did not include enough
right.
factors against. Because
Well,
looking at the number, I can tell you the number is bogus. I don't believe it to that level.
okay, cool. Okay, but Bayes is still helping them, right? So in this case, it's revealing that you left out certain relevant negative evidences that were successful. Obviously we had to because of time, but so when you gave your 75%, that wasn't on the basis of just what we looked at today. That was kind of where you are including evidences we haven't even heard of or
I
talked about.
think it has to. I mean, you're asking me to
Yeah.
access processes in my subconscious that I do not have access to, but I think it has to include that. I mean, this is something I've been studying for on and off for years, and I only gave you a few items that I put together, between last night and this morning. And I was planning on doing a lot more factors, but we did this earlier than I thought. But I was going to actually work a lot harder on the negative
Mhm.
evidences, but I cannot fully express uh, in the time that we have to talk about this formula all of the reasons why my doubts weigh 100% down to 75. But I can say for certain that I'm at about 75%. And when I look at the numbers, if let me just pull my screen up again for a moment, if you don't mind.
Okay. Just before I do that, I'll just say this while I have mine up. So like this has been a huge success then because again, Bayes is a helpful heuristic. It's telling you, given the inputs you've got under consideration, where you would be, kind of thing. And this can expose if something's way off, like this one is off from David, it can expose two things. Number one, when we're doing multiple lines of evidence, there's what the problem of innumeracy. Humans are horrible at dealing with large numbers and dealing with multiple sets of evidences and putting it together to make a cumulative judgment. That's why I think using Bayes is such a great approach. Or
See,
number
actually,
two,
I think that humans are very
or
good
number
at it.
two,
Go ahead,
or
though.
number two, David, or number two, what was revealed here again, it could be David's horrible at it, but more likely because we've discovered, well, Bayes is off here because there are bits of evidences in David's head that he was factoring in that he was basing his 75% on that aren't included in Bayes here. So, okay, great. We go back to what are those? And we would add those in. And I'm assuming there are also positive evidences you left out
Hmm.
of this thing as well, right? So great. So we can add that to the Bayesian analysis, and presumably it would modify to be more realistic and stuff like that. So that I just wanted to say that, like, even though this is great, because number one, it either proves that your human beings aren't good, or it could expose that, hey, this isn't true to life. What am I missing? And we discovered, David said, look, there are negative evidences that I just didn't even talk about. So that this is a success. But I'll shut up and I'll stop sharing and go ahead and share what you wanted to.
You don't shut up. I mean, you're just interrupting. I mean, that's skeptics and
I
seekers, dude. But okay, so I just wanted to, go back through some of these numbers in a kind of a rough. In fact, do me a favor. Take out your calculator again. You don't have to put it on the screen. And just do a simple average of the numbers. A simple of the ones that we used: 65, 53. I think that, and 57, we used 57 and 74, 82, and 68. Do a
Wait,
simple,
you're
a
going too fast.
simple average.
Well, that's what I'm trying to do, but you're going too fast. So
Oh,
okay, so
sorry.
up to so I included 57,
Yeah,
68.
I can make this smaller here so that you can see the whole thing. I
Okay,
don't know
and
how eagle-eyed you're.
I've got up to 78 so far, and then times 74. Okay, times 82 times 68. And then the negative evidences.
No, don't include those.
Oh, don't include
Just
those.
just
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 divided by 7. What the heck? Oh shoot, yeah.
no, to get a simple average, all you need to do is
I
just
know
add
50.
just add the numbers and divide it
You're
by the
right.
number of numbers.
You're right. Yeah, sorry, I was multiplying.
Yeah.
Okay, 52.14 plus 78 plus 74 plus 82.
In fact, you go ahead and yeah, you can go ahead and do the negatives as well because it's not going to hurt this at all.
Okay, so plus 39 plus 41. Okay, and so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then how many were up top? 6, 7, 8, 9 divided by 9.
Okay.
So you're at about 62%.
Okay. This is closer to where my head is than a full Bayesian analysis. It's just some simple factors that I have thrown some emotional numbers at, uh, in considering just these few things. There are more in my head that I think that could, adjust the number to where I ultimately feel it is. But this is just simple math. It's a simple process, and I think it gives you a better snapshot because all we can do is a snapshot. Ask me to think these things through for another year, and the numbers might be different. This gives you a snapshot of what I am thinking and where I am in my degree of credence to my proposition.
It
And
doesn't
because
though,
it,
right?
hang on, because we have 9 of these things, if we add in a margin of error, and I don't know what kind of margin of error we would put in there. I think that we could, even with these numbers and no other factors, get even closer to where I actually feel about these things. But I feel much closer to 62% than I do to 97%.
Yeah, but the 62% is based on, number one, it's based on an average of an incomplete set. Your 75 is based on a complete set that we haven't included. So like
Right, but I'm just saying, even
Relatively.
since it's an incomplete set either way, it's an incomplete set if I do a simple average, it's an incomplete set if I do Bayes. The one with the simple average gets me closer. And if I completed the set, I don't know where it would be with Bayes, but I'm just saying, I don't know that I would argue overly strong that 62% is too low for where I feel. So you might have, one of these ridiculous ranges of between 62 and 77%, this 15% range kind of thing. But this is why we don't put numbers on these things.
But this is why we do. I mean, Bayes' theorem is every mathematician in the world will, Anthony 66 will agree with me. You use Bayes, you don't use the average, and your subjective overall judgment is just wrong in this case. Like, again, you're basing it on something different. Like, is there any way you could give a subjective probability judgment? Again, you've already seen the results, so it's kind of cheating. But just I asked you just on the factors we covered in this show, like everything you said and everything that's here in the thing. Because that's what I asked you, and you said that was 75%. And that's is either the problem of innumeracy or we're missing something. There's something that's
The
going in.
reason why I don't agree with your assessment that it's a problem of innumeracy, and I do believe I understand what that means, that there's so many things to consider, and we're bad at considering them all and uh, looking at them objectively. I would say that we're bad at listing the all factors, but we're not bad at knowing all factors. And so this is one of these human evolutionary instinct kind of arguments that I would make. We don't even know all of the things that we take into account when we're making a decision. When you're a child, you take fewer things into account. When you're 50, you take lots of things into account. In fact, you take so many things into account over the course of 50 years that you can't possibly think of all of them. It would take 50 years to think of all of the things that go into your decision. And so we have, I think, internal mechanisms that help us consider all of the factors in a subconscious way to come up with an answer that's about right. Why did we cross the road in our car? Why did we go and take a left then and not 3 seconds before then? You can't give me all of the answers. You can give me one or two of the gross top level answers, but you can't actually give all of the reasons why you made that choice. That doesn't mean that you didn't make the right choice just because you can't enumerate it all. So I actually think that what you're seeing as a problem of innumeracy is the problem with us being able to pull out all of those details and write them down and weigh them individually. Yeah, I would agree with that. But I do think that we are actually enumerating internally accurately.
Okay, well, it's a known fallacy. The problem of innumeracy, just what it is saying make us human beings making those overall subjective credence. We suck at it. We regularly suck at it. So it's interesting. I do agree partially that it is hard work, right? Like to spell out to make explicit everything that's going into your decisions. Um, that's hard, and we try our best to do it. And I think that's why Bayes is great because it forces us to do as best we can to spell out all those factors. But yeah, there may be some hidden factor we're just missing. That can always happen. We're reasonable real seekers. We do our best, but it's still if I were to which way is better, it's like saying, look, making out a list of pros and cons. I love how Andrew used that as an analogy. That's exactly what I'm doing with Bayes, and I think all things considered, that's better than just doing this overall subjective thing because it is a known psychological problem that
Andrew's brain is powered by an HP scientific calculator. Okay, you can't use him as the average guy. He doesn't think like, and I
well,
do. He and I don't think alike. And I don't like
Don't you think
that.
the average person does make a list of pros and cons? Like, in terms of math, I consider myself an average person, maybe even a little below average in some cases. Like when Andrew gives his examples of certain things and stats, I don't understand. Like I have no idea what he was talking about in the show we did, where he's talking about 33, 33, and 30 or something like that. Like it sounds to me he was using maybe odds for him, but if he's not, and if he was talking about my equation, I have zero clue what he was trying to say.
I don't either. I'm not a math guy. I know that Andrew's able to successfully use advanced math to write code. The
Yeah,
code works, so he must know something
yeah, I
that I
couldn't
don't know,
begin.
because I've written code and the code didn't work. So
Oh, you're even
I
more
suck at
advanced
it.
than me. I can write ones and zeros. I know how to do that, but
Yeah,
no
you
idea how to
got to
code.
do them in a very specific order.
Okay.
so, so yeah, I mean, it's look, I think that people who think like you and Andrew and maybe Anthony 66, maybe Darren, those of you who are powered by some ancient chip running some version of Linux on your brains, you might think in a certain way that's different from most people. But I think I am holding down the average pretty well here in the most people category. Yeah, we even if we could, which I argue we can't, even if we could think of all of the factors that go into a decision that we make, I don't think that we could put good numbers to them. Another example is, I'm not saying that we're not perfect at it. I think we're pretty good. We're good enough to survive. But you're in a public place, someone approaches you, um, and they start talking to you about whatever. You immediately begin to what you would call calculate whether this is a dangerous situation, whether this is a con artist, whether this is someone who needs your help. How do you figure that out? Oh, well, they're a black person, they're a Chinese person, they're a Mexican person. That goes into the calculus, whether you know it or not. Whether you consciously know it or not, I promise you that is a part of your calculus. They were a man, they were a woman, they were obviously gay or trans. They were, even if you, no matter what you think about how good you are, all of that stuff is going into your calculus. And
I,
so
I I don't
all
think
these
so.
factors, what they're wearing, the kind of language they're using, is it a proper language? Is it some kind of ebonics? What's going on? I'm just saying, those aren't any part of the calculations that you would make if you tried to write them out. You don't even know they're happening, but they are happening. They are a part of the calculation, and that's that number that you would give the, is this a trustworthy person or not? Should I interact with this person or not? Is not going to be mathematically accurate in any sense of the way, because you don't even know what you're dealing with. You don't even know all the categories. You don't know the lines of the equation. However, as humans, we're pretty good about surviving those situations. Despite the number of people who've been taken in by con artists, gotten in the cars, wound up dead somewhere, as a species, we are pretty good at this fuzzy logic calculation, and we don't need numbers to
I
not get
I
in a car
I
with a stranger.
Okay, here's my last attempt. I think I might be able to convince you maybe on this one. If I fail, okay, so be it. But the problem of enumerancy is a proven problem. I mean, there's lots of fallacies based on it, like the gambler's fallacy. When there's multiple components, would you at least agree that it is a good thing, and Bayes forces you to do this as much as possible to break things down, right? Because hey, look, I think this guy's guilty. Now, again, your politics are not my politics. I don't believe in implicit racism and all this systemic racism and all this stuff. But let's say it's true. I'm just going to take the aspects you go with, right? Okay, I've concluded this guy's guilty. Isn't it a good thing to break it down into the components? Like, well, why do I think he's guilty? Well, he's dressed like a gangster or a thug. he's got a limp that makes him walk this way. Oh, he's black as opposed to Chinese. Oh, he's um I don't know, he's playing loud music. Whatever you think the reasons are, and then it's good to identify them as best we can and say this is a good reason or this isn't, and then identify and make a list of pros and cons, the good reasons for, the good reasons against, and try your best. Isn't it good? My question is, isn't it good to try and, since we have these biases and problems, isn't it good to break things down and to try to identify and isolate the individual things so that we can at least go, well, this is a good reason, this is a bad reason, something like that. Um,
I will try to meet you partway.
okay.
Um, for some people, because our brains don't all work the same way. For some people, that may be true.
Mhm.
It may be correct that you should try to break down things in as much detail as possible to get at it, because that may be how you work best. That may be true for a lot of people, right? I think, like I said, I think you and Andrew are not all that different in
Yeah.
that aspect of how your brains work. But I wouldn't put Andrew in the category of average person either. So, and I suspect A66 has some aspect of that too. Certainly, Jordan, uh, from Reasons to Doubt, I think his brain works in a similar way. And so I think that you can make a case that for certain kinds of people, which is why we should all do the experiment and just see. Right. So this is one of the reasons I'm doing it. I could have told you that I'm not one of those people. I think, if anything, this bears that out. But for some people, I think it is helpful to just try to break down all of the things that you can think about, put them in a list, put some numbers to them, and make a decision. The caveat to that, though, is my concern is that you're going to get a false sense of security, of accuracy of your number, because you think you have enumerated everything, or most things, or everything that matters. You think that you've got the proper list and that you can do math on that list. But the list itself is also subjective, and it is a measure of your biases. The list itself, just putting together the list, is that person guilty? Let's narrow that down to, let's make the list 10 things. 10 things that we're going to consider. But there are a trillion things that you actually need to consider if you're going to calculate whether that person's guilty or not, that you simply can't do. Um, you know, making it more realistic number, 100 things, and maybe you list 10 things. Your list is always incomplete, and it's always going to represent your biases. And so you can't make a list that reveals your biases, because you're using your biases to make the list. So I would just say that, yeah, if you can make a more accurate list, if you can do a better job, if you're the kind of person who can do that exercise and make it work for you, then by all means, this might be a method that helps you do that. But I am the person who recognizes that my list is bullshit. Even as I'm looking at the list that's on the screen, I've been thinking about this for about 5 years. I got 5 pieces of background knowledge, 2 of which were rejected. 3 pieces of evidence, 3 pieces of counter evidence. This list is utter bullshit. If you really want to get at the heart of my research for the last 5 years. And so I can give you a much more accurate answer by telling you it's about 75% certain. And I don't know that I can make a list that would come to that. But what I know about my research is way more accurate than any number you're ever going to generate from some bullshit list I make. I'm never going to be good at this, but you might be. And so I am not going to doubt your numbers as it speaks to your internal um,
That's a good point. I might be able
feelings.
to agree with. It could be some people are better at introspection than others. So obviously, like obviously in this case, I totally believe you because look, I gave you like less than 24 hours to come up with your list. Again, the point of this show is just kind of illustration to show you how it would work. But I totally get like it's like when you guys put me on the spot saying show your work after like years of research, like a 200-page cosmological argument. I'm like, what do you mean? Like you're telling me to go over everything in like 2 minutes as a summarization, and then when I give a little summarization, like, well, here are the three premises. Like, oh, but that's the, you know what I mean? So
Right.
I
Now,
totally get
it's a completely unfair request. I'm perfectly happy to
yeah,
admit that.
but
That I didn't realize how unfair of a request it was when I made it, but it's unfair, and this you can't demand someone show their work even if they've done the work because the work would take thousands of pages to show, and uh, doing this exercise of less than 24 hours, even on something that I've thought about for years, there's no way I can show this work. I mean, I could put down what I have, and all I can say is it shows you a false result. And the reason for the false result is because it's impossible for me to show you all of the work that goes into it.
gotcha. The where I would disagree though, at least for some people, because it could be there's some people like again, I can't get inside your head. Like I think I am pretty good if I've got the sufficient time at laying down all of the vast majority of a sufficient degree of the factors that are going into my thing. It's totally true what David said. I might miss something that's subconscious or something like that, or there can be biases, but by listing it out, I think I can get it to a sufficient degree, and it mitigates against the biases in lots of ways. So I think I'm capable of doing this list thing. Um, but I take your point. I've never thought about it. There may be people that aren't good at making lit. Like even if I gave you 10 years, this is probably the best list you can give. And you're like, there's something missing. I just don't know how to state it or something. And yeah, in that case, we would have to kind of, okay, we can't use Bayes because there is a key component that you know is there, but you just can't express into words. And if it can't be made explicit, we can't evaluate it objectively. So um, that could be true. I just think in the majority of cases for the average person, we're pretty good at if we give a sufficient amount of time and thought and critical thought to it, we can break things down into um, the essential components of something.
I think we each have different ways of getting about the same thing. So writing, when I first started writing, it wasn't actually to make money. I've been writing for a while. I started writing as a way of thinking about things. So when I have something that I'm actively thinking about, I sit in front of a keyboard and I write extemporaneously. Um, and as it happens, I think in art in article form factor and bullet points and things like that. And so
Oh,
when I sit down to write, I just write as if I had an outline in front of me. I don't. It's just how I think. So in that way, my mind may not be ordered exactly in the same way that the average person's mind is either. But this is how I come to know my mind. One of the ways that I come to know my mind is I write, and so I write a lot. And it was just a grand coincidence that I was able to actually make money doing that. So that was beneficial to me when I could do that. You come to know your mind by assessing um, lines of evidence that you put mathematical symbols next to. Okay, I'm not going to deny that as a legitimate form of knowing yourself. It's a form that I can never wrap my mind around because that doesn't work for me. Um, Andrew, I think he probably works more like you than me because when I talk to him about my process of writing, he no more knows what I'm talking about than I know what he's talking about when he talks about coding. it's we're not even close. And yet, we have methods of this kind of deeper introspection that I think your method is really trying to get at. And so, um, I would agree that yes, I have ways of introspecting and understanding what I really think about a thing that goes well beyond a simple gut feeling. I just don't use math to do it. I use words to do it.
Yeah,
And so I don't want to come across as invalidating your process, which I know I have come across invalidating your process simply because it doesn't match with my process.
that's a great point. I'm actually going to agree totally. And try, despite debates about, what's better or not, I think that most people in human history have come to rational conclusions without needing math or even hearing. Bayes wasn't even invented until like the late 18th century. After David Hume had never even heard of it and stuff, right? So this is not necessary. I think it's a helpful heuristic. It worked for me, and I think it can help other people. But yeah, there are other ways that don't involve math or Bayes, and you can still come to rational conclusions without it. So I do wholeheartedly say that there are other non-math ways that are valid in the sense of epistemically valid. I mean, Peter did not engage in probability calculus when he came to faith in Christ. I think he was still rational. So yeah, we wholeheartedly agree on that front.
All right. Well, with that wholehearted agreement, uh, yeah, I don't think there's anything to do. There will not be any blood sport today, so you'll just have to wait for the cage match between Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. That will never happen. And
Yeah, just I guess
on,
announcements kind of thing before we go. I don't know if you have any, but so I'm going to be debating an atheist on Tux TV, Jimmy named Jimmy Tux. Do you know who that is, David? Or
I do not.
okay, so he saw my debate with Jordan from Reason to Doubt, and we were kind of debating each other in the comments and stuff. But we're going to be debating next Tuesday, the 22nd, live on his channel, which I think is Tux TV. And yeah, so he has an interesting thesis, three topics. So number one, Genesis is deceptive, but there's nuance here because he argues that not only is it deceptive on God's part, if God were to exist, presuming God existed, he compares him to a fisherman. Fishing for men kind of is evil. God's an evil fisherman. He has bait or something like that. I'll get into that, but he also argues that even assuming on atheism, he says that the actual human biblical authors they intended Genesis to be deceptive. So I'm gonna like to see him try to prove that and discuss that with him. Also stuff about supernatural versus natural beings. There's no proof for, and he also wants to talk to me about how can we ever rule out Satan when we're looking at miracle claims and stuff like that. So yeah, look out. That's I think the next show that I'll be doing live on his channel there. So
Yeah, sounds interesting. I think that just based on that synopsis, he's made some points that I have made in the past, but it also sounds like he goes well beyond what what I would have ever claimed. We will have to see how Mr. Tux
yep, Jimmy
presents
Tux.
his argument. Jimmy Tux. I mean, that sounds like a mob name.
It does. It does a
Okay.
bit, yeah, now that you mention it. But
So, yeah, Jimmy Tux. Um,
he seems just like I've just met him, but yeah, seems like a good guy. He's very opinionated. I think he's more of the polemical style though, so I'm gonna go in prepared. I think it'll be kind of like a Pine Creek style thing. So I'll just go in prepared for that style. So
it's a nice podcast you have there. It'd be a shame if something would have happened to it. Uh, so- I don't- I
Anyway,
might be punchy. I need pain medicine. Look, I'm gonna stop this recording. We'll talk
right.
to you guys later.
Take care.